My name is Imani Jackson. My parents refused to pay $90,000 to save my son's life, but spent $380,000 on my sister's extravagant wedding. Years later, when their perfect life fell apart and they appeared on my doorstep begging for help, I looked my father dead in the eye and I shut the door. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever been the one who had to be strong because your own family refused to show up for you. The air in the pediatric cardiology clinic always felt too cold. It smelled like hand sanitizer and stale coffee, a scent I now associated with fear. I sat on the edge of the stiff visitor's chair, my knuckles white from gripping the vinyl armrests. My name is Imani Jackson. I'm 31 years old, and my world was balancing on the edge of a knife. Across from me, Dr. Evans, a tall, kind-faced black man who had been our rock, sighed deeply. He had been Leo's doctor for 4 years. He had seen us through every hospital stay, every false alarm, every crushing setback. He wasn't just a doctor anymore. He was a witness. He swiveled the large monitor toward me, his expression grim. Imani. He started, his voice low and gentle. We need to talk about Leo's progress, or rather the lack of it. I braced myself, my breath catching in my throat. In the next room, I could hear Leo, my 7-year-old son, coughing. It was a shallow, weak sound that tore me apart every time I heard it. He was my entire world. His smile, even now, was the only thing that kept me going. But that smile was getting rarer. The tiredness in his eyes was starting to win. Dr. Evans pointed to the flickering, grainy image on the screen. It was Leo's heart. The condition is progressing faster than we anticipated, he said. Arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. It's a rare genetic disorder. I nodded, my throat tight. I knew the name. As a genetic researcher myself, I knew exactly what it meant. His heart muscle, the very thing that was supposed to keep him alive, was being replaced by useless fatty tissue. It was failing. The standard medications, he continued, the beta blockers, the rhythm stabilizers, they just aren't working anymore, Imani. We're running out of options. I felt the floor drop away. I was a single mother. Leo's father, Jamal, had walked out 4 years ago, right after the first official diagnosis. He told me he couldn't handle the pressure of a sick kid. He just left. He vanished. I hadn't seen him since. I was a postdoctoral researcher at UCLA. My life was a frantic, desperate balancing act between the sterile quiet of my genetics lab and the sterile beeping terror of the hospital. Everyone said my research was brilliant, cutting edge, but postdoc is just a fancy term for overeducated and desperately underpaid. I had no savings left. Jamal paid no child support. Every dollar I had, every cent I'd ever managed to scrape together, had already been poured into keeping Leo alive. So what's next? I whispered. My voice trembled so hard I barely recognized it. What do we do now? Dr. Evans leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine. There is one option. A new experimental gene therapy trial starting in Boston. It's revolutionary, Imani. It's not a patch, it's not a temporary fix. It's a potential cure. Hope flared in my chest, so sudden and bright, it was painful. Okay, I said, sitting up straighter. We'll do it. Sign us up. I'll call the insurance. How do I get them to… He held up his hand, his expression pained, stopping me cold. That's the problem, Imani. It's not fully approved by the FDA. Insurance won't touch it. He slid a sleek, terrifyingly professional brochure across the desk. The logo was for a private biotech firm. The deposit to secure his spot in the trial is $90,000. I stopped breathing. And, he added, his voice heavy, they need the deposit by next Friday, or they give the spot to the next child on the list. $90,000 in 1 week. He might as well have said 90 million. It was an impossible number. It was a death sentence. This trial isn't fully approved by the FDA. Dr. Evans continued, his voice heavy. He knew what that meant. Insurance won't cover it. They consider it experimental. I gripped the armrests, my knuckles turning white. How much? I whispered. I almost didn't want to know. How much is it? The deposit to secure his spot in the trial is $90,000. The words hit me like a physical blow. $90,000. I think I may have laughed a short, hysterical sound that died in my throat. He might as well have said 90 million. It was an impossible number. It was a death sentence. And, he added, his voice pained, they need the deposit by next Friday, 1 week from tomorrow. If they don't receive it, they have to give the spot to the next child on the list. Imani, the waiting list is over a year long. 1 week, $90,000. I felt the room tilt. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I pulled up my banking app, my thumb hovering over the icon, praying for a miracle. Praying that I had miscalculated, that there was some hidden account, some forgotten stock I owned. The screen loaded. My checking account, $437. Enough for groceries and my electricity bill. My savings account, $1,212. That was it. Everything I had. $1,649 total. I scrolled desperately through my transaction history, as if looking at it again would change the reality. The screen was a long, painful list of medical debt. $2,000 last month for the copay on his medication, $5,000 for the hospital stay in August, $3,000 for the specialist visit in June. Every dollar I had earned, every dollar I had ever saved, was already gone. It had been poured into this losing battle, into just barely keeping my son's head above water. And now the tidal wave was here, and I had nothing left to fight it with. Imani. Dr. Evans's voice pulled me back. I couldn't look at him. I just stared at the wall, at a faded poster explaining the food pyramid. $90,000. It was the price of a luxury car. It was a down payment on a house. It was a number that in my world simply did not exist. The clinic, the cold air, the smell of sanitizer, it all started to close in on me. I felt a wave of nausea. I was going to fail him. My son was going to die because I was poor. Because I was a postdoc researcher and not a banker. Because his father was a coward who had disappeared. I stood up, my legs feeling weak. "Thank you, doctor," I managed to say. The words felt like ash in my mouth. I walked out of his office in a daze, past the receptionist, past the other anxious parents in the waiting room. I made it to the elevator before my legs gave out. I leaned against the cool metal wall, the tears I had been holding back finally burning down my cheeks. I had no options. My credit cards were maxed out. My 401k had been emptied last year to pay for the arrhythmia monitor. I had no one. No, that wasn't true. As the elevator doors opened, a cold, hard thought pushed through the panic. There was one place, one last desperate, humiliating option. A place I hadn't been in almost a year. A place that represented everything I had tried to escape but was now my only hope. There was only one place I could possibly go to get that kind of money: my parents. The 30-minute drive to View Park felt like crossing into another dimension. My 2008 Toyota Corolla, with its rattling engine and peeling paint, felt like an invading scrap heap in these quiet, pristine streets. This was where the established, wealthy black elite of Los Angeles lived. This was where my parents, Marcus and Denise Jackson, had built their fortress of reputation. I pulled up to their immaculate 2-story home, the landscaping perfect, the new Escalade gleaming in the driveway. I took a deep breath, tasting the bitter pill of my own failure. I hated being here. I hated having to ask. My mother, Denise, opened the door. She was dressed in a crisp linen pantsuit, looking like she was ready for a charity luncheon, not a family crisis. "Imani?" she said, her voice tight with surprise. "We weren't expecting you." There was no warmth, no hug. I need to talk to you and Dad, I said, pushing past her into the foyer. The house was cold silent and smelled faintly of lemon polish and money. It was a museum, not a home. My father Marcus was in his study, sitting in his high-backed leather chair, reading the Wall Street Journal. He was a retired investment banker, a man who had built his identity on success and despised anything that looked like weakness. He peered at me over his glasses. "This is an unscheduled visit, Imani." "My son is dying," I said. There was no point in easing into it. The words hung in the air. We moved to the formal living room, a room I'd probably only sat in a dozen times my entire life. I sat on the edge of the stiff antique sofa. They sat opposite me like judges. I pulled the medical documents from my bag and spread them across the glass coffee table. The doctor's letter, the brochure for the Boston trial, the estimated cost. "Leo has maybe a week, maybe two without this," I said, my voice shaking despite my best effort to keep it steady. "There is an experimental gene therapy. It's his only chance. It costs $90,000 for the deposit. They need it by Friday." My parents stared at the papers, but their faces were unreadable. My mother, a prominent socialite, was the face of 3 different city charities. My father was on the board of the local museum. Their image in the community was everything. A dying grandchild, a daughter begging for money, this didn't fit their narrative. "I'm not asking for a handout," I said quickly, the humiliation burning in my throat. "I'm begging you for a loan. $90,000. I will sign anything. I will get a second job, a third job. I will pay you back every single cent with interest. Please, he's your grandson." Denise picked up the doctor's letter, her eyes scanning it. I watched her expression, looking for any flicker of empathy, of grandmotherly love. I found nothing but cold calculation. Marcus hadn't moved. He hadn't touched the papers. He was just watching me, his gaze analytical, detached. "Alone, you say?" He finally spoke. His voice was flat. "Yes, please. I don't know where else to go." I hated how small my voice sounded. I was a 31-year-old woman, a published scientist reduced to begging. I watched my father. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the Escalade in the driveway, at the immaculate lawn, at the portrait of himself and my mother hanging over the marble fireplace. He was looking at everything that mattered to him. Then he looked back at me. He didn't pick up the papers. He didn't look at Leo's picture. He just slowly, deliberately crossed his arms over his chest. "Imani, we don't have $90,000 just lying around." My father's voice cut through the silence. It was cold, final. He said it as if he were discussing a bad stock tip, not his grandson's life. "You need to be realistic," he added. I stared at him, the word realistic echoing in my head. My son was dying, and my father, a man living in a multi-million-dollar home, was telling me to be realistic. "Realistic?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Leo is dying, Dad. He's dying. What is not realistic about trying to save his life?" I pointed out the window, my hand shaking. "You just bought a brand new Escalade. I saw it in the driveway. It still has the temporary plates on it. That's at least $100,000 right there. How can you say you don't have the money?" My father Marcus actually scoffed. He waved his hand dismissively as if swatting away an annoying fly. "That's different, Imani. That's a business expense. It's about maintaining an image. Our clients, our partners, the boards we sit on. We have a certain status to uphold. People expect to see us in a car like that." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "An image? You're talking about an image?" "I'm talking about Leo breathing." "Don't be hysterical," he snapped. "It doesn't suit you. We are talking about our retirement, our life savings. We're not going to pour $90,000 into an experimental therapy that might not even work. It's a gamble, Imani, a bad investment." A bad investment. He called my son's life a bad investment. I turned to my mother, Denise, my eyes pleading. She had been silent the whole time, just watching, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mom, please, he's your grandson, your only grandson. How can you just sit there? How can you let him say this? My mother finally looked at me. Her expression wasn't loving. It wasn't sympathetic. It was annoyed. She looked inconvenienced. Imani, your father is right, she said, her voice smooth and cold. You made certain life choices. You chose to have a child with a man who wasn't stable. You chose to pursue a low-paying research job instead of taking the position your father offered you at the bank. These choices have consequences. This is not a consequence, Mom, I was shouting now, my composure shattering. This is a child's life. He's sick. He didn't ask for this. And we didn't ask for this either, she said, her voice rising to match mine. We've already given you so much. We paid for your education even when you abandoned law school for that science hobby. It's my career. It's a career that doesn't pay you enough to save your own son, apparently, she said. The cruelty of the words was breathtaking. She stood up, smoothing down her linen pantsuit. The conversation was over. They had made their decision. My son, their grandson, was not worth $90,000 to them. I gathered the papers from the table, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold them. I was sobbing now, ugly, desperate sobs. This was it. There was nowhere else to go. My mother sighed, a sound of pure irritation. Honestly, Imani, this drama is exactly why we can't get involved. You're too emotional. You need to handle your own problems. As I stumbled toward the door, blinded by tears, my mother delivered the final blow. She didn't say it meanly. She said it as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. We have to think about our own future too, Imani. We've worked hard for this life. We can't just throw it all away. My mother Denise let out a long, suffering sigh, as if I were the one burdening her. And let's be practical, Imani. How exactly would you pay us back $90,000? You can't even pay your own rent on that tiny researcher's salary. The lie hit me harder than the refusal. It was so casual, so unnecessary, so deliberately cruel. That's not true, I whispered, my voice shaking. I pay my own rent. I pay all my bills. I've never asked you for a dime for my rent. Oh, please, she said, waving her manicured hand, the diamonds on her rings flashing. Don't get defensive. We know you struggle. We see that old car you drive. We see your clothes. It's nothing to be ashamed of, Imani, but it proves you are not in a position to take on a loan of this magnitude. She was rewriting my reality. My prudence, the fact I did not buy a new car, the fact I did not buy designer clothes so I could afford Leo's medications, was being painted as failure. My ability to survive on a meager stipend was being twisted into incompetence. Then my father Marcus leaned forward. He put down his Wall Street Journal and steepled his fingers, acting as if he had just found the perfect, reasonable solution. Your mother is right, Imani. This isn't our problem to solve, he said, his voice laced with false authority. Why don't you simply try the hospital's payment plans? I'm sure they have options for people in your situation. In my situation, I repeated numbly. People in my situation. Yes. He continued, warming to his idea, clearly proud of his own problem-solving skills. And if that doesn't work, why not start one of those online fundraisers, a GoFundMe campaign? I see them all the time. People raise thousands of dollars for their odd situations. GoFundMe. The room spun. This was not a helpful suggestion. This was the true humiliation. This was the final twisting stab. The Jacksons of View Park. My father, who sat on the board of the museum. My mother Denise, who chaired the annual Mayor's Charity Gala, whose picture was in the paper every month, cutting ribbons and handing out oversized checks. A family whose entire identity was built on philanthropy, on giving money, on being the pillars of the Black Los Angeles elite, the very definition of old money in our community. They were not just refusing to help, they were telling me to go beg. They were telling me to take my failure, my sick child, my desperation, and put it on public display for the entire world to see. It was their way of washing their hands of me completely. By telling me to go to GoFundMe, they were officially classifying me as charity, as other. as someone not associated with them, not family. They were protecting their image by pushing me into the gutter. The tears that came were not just sad, they were hot with rage. The cruelty was so deep, so bottomless, I finally understood. They did not just not want to help. They wanted me to fail, because my failure, my struggle made their success, and Chloe's success, shine that much brighter. I stood up from the sofa. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely stand, but I forced myself. I slowly gathered the useless medical papers from the glass table. They looked at me, my father already looking annoyed that I was still there, my mother looking relieved that the unpleasantness was almost over. I looked my father dead in the eye. I will never forget this. I turned to my mother, whose face was a mask of indifference. Ever. I walked out of the room, my back straight, not looking back as I heard my father mutter, "Well, that was dramatic." I was standing in the marble foyer, my hand on the heavy brass doorknob, trying to pull in a single steady breath before I had to face the walk back to my rattling car. I could feel the cold judgment of my parents at my back. I felt like a failure, a beggar who had been turned away. Just as I pulled the door open, a wave of laughter and expensive perfume washed over me. "Oh, good, you're still here!" My younger sister Chloe breezed in, followed by her fiancé Trevor. They were glowing. Chloe, at 28, was everything I wasn't. She was the golden child. She had always been effortlessly beautiful, charming, and bubbly. She had our mother's lighter skin and our father's easy smile. She'd gone to the right schools, joined the right sororities, and never once disappointed our parents. And now she had secured the ultimate prize. Her fiancé Trevor was 30 tall and impeccably dressed. He was also white, with the kind of relaxed confidence that comes from generations of wealth and political connections. His family were kingmakers in California politics. This marriage for my parents was not just a celebration of love, it was a merger. It was the final crowning achievement that solidified the Jackson family's status. Chloe didn't seem to notice my red-rimmed eyes or the way I was clutching my purse like a life raft. She was too busy admiring her own hand, which she held up to the light. "He did it! He got the venue!" she squealed, flashing a diamond ring that was so large it looked heavy. It was a rock. It probably cost more than the $90,000 I had just begged for. "Trevor is just the best," she cooed, leaning into him. "I told him I had to have the Lake Como resort, the one we saw in the magazine, and he made it happen. He called his father and they pulled some strings, and it's ours." I just stared at her. Lake Como, in Italy. The shift in the room was immediate and violent. It was like the sun had come out from behind a cloud. My mother Denise, who seconds before had been looking at me with cold dismissal, completely transformed. Her face lit up with a brilliant, genuine smile I hadn't seen directed my way in years, if ever. "Oh, Chloe baby!" she cried, rushing forward to envelop my sister in a tight hug. She kissed her cheek, then turned to Trevor with that same dazzling smile. "Trevor, you are a miracle worker. We were so worried we wouldn't get that spot." She completely ignored me. I was still standing by the door, tears drying on my face, the medical papers for her dying grandson still clutched in my hand. I was invisible. "Of course," Trevor said smoothly, patting my mother's arm. "Anything for Chloe." My father Marcus came out of his study, his grim expression vanishing. "That's my girl," he boomed, kissing Chloe on the forehead. "We knew you'd make it happen, Trevor. This is going to be the wedding of the year." "Oh, it will be Daddy," Chloe said. "Wait until you see the estimates for the flowers." My mother looped her arm through Chloe's, already pulling her toward the living room, toward the life I would never be a part of. "That reminds me," my mother said, her voice giddy with excitement. "We just got off the phone with the wedding planner. We have so much to discuss." "Don't worry about the money, darling," my father Marcus said. His voice, which had been so cold and flat with me just moments ago, was now booming with paternal warmth. He was smiling at Chloe, a broad, proud smile that lit up his entire face. "There is no budget limit for my little girl's wedding. You get whatever you want. I stood frozen by the front door, my hand still on the knob. The medical papers in my other hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy, like slabs of lead. $90,000 to save his grandson's life was a bad investment. It was unrealistic. It was risking their retirement. But for this wedding, there was no budget limit. Trevor, my sister's fiancé, draped a possessive arm around Chloe's shoulder. He smiled a smooth, practiced smile that I realized was purely for my parents' benefit. "We're so glad you feel that way, Marcus," he said. "We've actually decided on the venue. It's the Villa d'Este on Lake Como." "Oh, wonderful," my mother. Denise gasped, her hands flying to her chest. "The one we saw in Town and Country. Oh, Chloe, it's a dream." "It is," Chloe agreed, beaming. "And Trevor, you're amazing. He pulled so many strings to get it." "It's nothing," Trevor said, the picture of magnanimous wealth. "My father has some connections on their board. The only catch," he added, looking at my father, "is that they require a rather significant deposit to secure the date. It's non-refundable." My father laughed, a full, hearty laugh that echoed in the marble foyer. "Trevor, my boy, significant is a relative term. Whatever they need, we'll wire it tomorrow. This is a celebration." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was trapped in this grotesque, surreal play. They were discussing wiring what was probably hundreds of thousands of dollars to Italy as easily as I might order a pizza. And I was standing right there, an invisible beggar, having just been denied a fraction of that amount to save my child. The hypocrisy was so vast, so complete, it was suffocating. I realized it wasn't that they couldn't help me. It was that they wouldn't. My son's life was not as important as their daughter's wedding photos. My son's life was not as valuable as their image. My son's life was not worth the cost of a deposit on a party venue. They had all turned back toward the living room. Now the three of them, Marcus, Denise, and Chloe, chattering excitedly about florists and guest lists. Trevor caught my eye for a brief second. There was no recognition, no empathy, just a flicker of mild annoyance, as if wondering why the maid was still lingering by the door. I must have made a sound, maybe a gasp or a sob, because Chloe finally turned around. She looked at me, her head tilted as if seeing me for the first time. The joy on her face faded, replaced by a look of mild irritation. "Oh," she said, her voice bright and dismissive. "Imani, are you still here? I thought you'd left already." She took in my tear-streaked face, my old coat, the crumpled papers in my hand. "You look exhausted, Chi. You really should go home and get some rest." I didn't say another word. I couldn't. My throat was closed, my body numb. I turned my back on Chloe's concerned false expression and my parents' dismissive smiles. I pulled the heavy door open, stepped out onto the wide, immaculate porch, and pulled the door shut behind me, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet, affluent street. I walked down the stone pathway toward my old beaten-up Corolla. The air was cool, but I felt like I was suffocating. I was halfway to my car when my mother's voice, giddy and loud with excitement, drifted clearly through the open living room window. "Oh, Trevor, don't you worry about a thing," Denise was saying, her voice bright and celebratory. "Your father and I will take care of the $380,000 deposit for the Italian resort first thing tomorrow morning. We'll wire it. It's done. You deserve it, Chloe. You deserve the best of everything." $380,000. The number stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't just no budget limit, it was a number, a real solid number, $380,000. More than 4 times what I had just begged for. More than 4 times the amount that stood between my son and his life. I stumbled the last few feet to my car, my hand shaking so hard it took me 3 tries to get the key in the lock. I collapsed into the driver's seat, the old fabric smelling like my own life of stale coffee and worry. I gripped the steering wheel, my forehead resting against it. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. I just sat there as the sound of their happy, excited laughter, an entire world away, drifted from the house. $380,000, $90,000. The numbers just kept repeating in my head over and over. A deposit for a party. The price of my son's life. $380,000. They had it. They had it all along. And they had chosen. I sat in the dark of my tiny apartment long after Leo had fallen into a restless, shallow sleep in the next room. The only light came from my laptop screen. The GoFundMe homepage blurred through my tears. My father's words, "Start one of those online fundraisers," echoed in my head. It had not been a suggestion. It had been a dismissal. He was pushing me out of the family narrative and into the category of charity. For a family like the Jacksons of View Park, public begging was the ultimate sin. It was airing dirty laundry. It was admitting weakness to the world. It was a failure of the perfect self-sufficient image they had spent a lifetime building. My mother Denise would rather die than have her friends from the charity galas know her daughter was asking strangers for money online. They hadn't just refused me. They had dared me to humiliate myself. Swallowing my pride, which felt like swallowing broken glass, I started to type. My fingers felt numb. I uploaded a photo of Leo from last summer before he got too thin, before the dark circles under his eyes became permanent. It was a picture of him laughing, his head thrown back, holding up a grasshopper he'd found. I wrote his story. I explained the genetic disorder. I explained the experimental treatment in Boston. I explained the $90,000 deposit. I stared at the publish button for a long, agonizing minute. My hand was shaking. Clicking it felt like setting fire to the last shred of dignity I had. It felt like proving them right. That I was a failure. That I couldn't handle my own problems. I closed my eyes, thought of Leo's shallow breathing, and I clicked. I shared the link on my private Facebook page. The first donations trickled in. $50 from my old postdoc lab partner in Chicago. $25 from my neighbor across the hall. $100 from Dr. Evans himself, which made me cry all over again. My colleagues, other researchers who were just as broke as I was, gave what they could. $10. $20. After 3 days, the campaign had stalled. It had raised only $10,000. It was a lot of money, but it wasn't $90,000. It wasn't even close. The deadline was 4 days away. Then my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in a while. Aunt Janelle. My Aunt Janelle was my mother's older sister. They hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. Where my mother Denise had married into wealth and built her life around status and appearances, Janelle had remained a community activist in South LA. She ran a youth center. She organized protests. She was everything my parents despised, loud, proud, and more concerned with justice than with what the neighbors thought. "Imani, baby, I just saw your fundraiser." Her voice was rough and warm. "Why didn't you call me?" "I was too ashamed," I whispered, the tears starting again. "Ashamed," she boomed. "Ashamed of what? Ashamed of fighting for your child." "You let me tell you something. Your parents, they've forgotten who they are. They're so busy playing king and queen up in View Park, they forgot what real life is. They forgot what family is." I heard her fumbling with her purse. "I'm sending $2,000 right now. It's everything I have in my savings, baby. I wish it was more, I really do. That sister of mine, Denise, she always did value shiny things over real people." A notification popped up. GoFundMe new donation, $2,000. The total now sat at $12,000. "Thank you, Auntie," I sobbed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't say anything," Janelle said firmly. "You just keep fighting for that boy, and you remember they are the failures, Imani, not you. Never you." I hung up, feeling a strange, fierce love for my aunt and a cold, deep anger for my parents. But the validation didn't change the math. I looked at the GoFundMe page. $12,000. I needed 78,000 more, and I had 4 days. The money wasn't enough, and time was running out. The call from Leo's school nurse came on a Tuesday. "Imani, you need to come. Now. Leo is having trouble breathing." I sprinted from my lab coat flapping, my heart hammering against my ribs. I made it to the school in 12 minutes, running through red lights. I found him in the nurse's office sitting on a cot, his small chest heaving. His lips were tinged with a terrifying shade of blue. He wasn't just having trouble breathing, he was suffocating. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and the smell of antiseptic. I held his small, cold hand, whispering, "It's okay, baby, mommy's here," while the paramedic fit an oxygen mask over his face. At the hospital, they rushed him into the emergency room. Dr. Evans met me at the doors, his usual kind expression replaced by a mask of grave urgency. "It's a severe arrhythmia, Imani," he said, already walking at a pace I had to run to keep up with. "His heart is out of rhythm. We have to shock him." I was pushed into a family waiting room while they worked on my son. For an hour, I sat alone staring at a travel poster of Greece, convinced my son was dying on the other side of that door. When Dr. Evans finally came to get me, he looked exhausted. "He's stable," he said, and I collapsed in relief. "But he's not out of the woods. We're moving him to the pediatric ICU. We have to monitor this. His heart is much weaker than we thought." I sat by his bedside for the next 24 hours, watching the heart monitor trace his fragile life in green, jagged lines. I didn't leave. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I made the call. "This is Imani Jackson," I told my supervisor at UCLA. "My son is in the ICU. I can't come in. I don't know when I can come back." The silence on the other end was heavy. I knew what it meant. My postdoctoral fellowship was unpaid leave. No work meant no money. My career, the one thing I had for myself, was over. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered but Leo. On the third day, a woman from the hospital billing department found me. She was polite but firm. "Ms. Jackson, your son's ICU stay is not fully covered by your graduate insurance. We need a significant deposit to continue his current level of care." I looked at my phone. The GoFundMe was at $12,000. The billing representative was asking for $15,000, just for the next few days. I transferred the entire GoFundMe balance without a second thought. It was gone in an instant, and it still wasn't enough. I walked down to the hospital parking lot, my phone open to Craigslist. I had posted my 2008 Corolla for $2,500. Cash only. Must sell today. A man was already waiting. He was a student and he haggled me down to $2,000. I didn't care. I signed the title over with a shaking hand, took the cash and went back inside. I deposited the cash and gave it to the hospital. I was still short. I sat in the cafeteria, my head in my hands. I pulled out my wallet. I had 2 credit cards, one with a $5,000 limit, one with a $3,000 limit. I walked back to the billing department and maxed them both out. I was now completely, utterly broke. I had no car. I had no job. I had nothing left to sell. Dr. Evans found me later that day sitting in the hallway outside the ICU. I was just staring at the wall, completely empty. "Imani," he said softly, sitting beside me. "He's stable, for now. But that arrhythmia was a major warning sign. His heart can't take another one of those. We're out of time. It has to be now. The Boston trial is the only path left. We need that $90,000. I sat on the floor of the hospital corridor, my back pressed against the cold, sterile wall. Dr. Evans's words echoed in my head. It has to be now. I had one last desperate option, one last number to call. I knew it was useless, but I had to try. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my phone. I found her name, Chloe. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up, convinced she wouldn't answer when the call finally connected. "Imani, what is it?" Her voice was breathless, high-pitched, and clearly annoyed. "I'm literally in the middle of my fitting right now." "Chloe, thank God." I sobbed, the relief that she had answered making me weak. "Chloe, please, you have to help me. It's Leo. He's in the ICU. He just had a severe arrhythmia, Dr. Evans says. He says we're out of time." I could hear the rustle of expensive fabric on her end and faint, polite voices speaking French in the background. "A fitting?" I asked, my mind struggling to catch up. "Where are you?" I'm in Paris, obviously, she said, her tone sharp as if I were an idiot for not knowing. At the designer's atelier, they're doing the final alterations on my wedding gown. This is literally the most important appointment of the entire wedding, Imani. I can't be disturbed. Paris. She was in Paris. Chloe, I don't care about the dress, I cried, my voice rising in panic. Leo is dying. The doctor said we need the money for the Boston trial, the $90,000. I asked Mom and Dad and they said no. They said they didn't have it. Oh my God, Chloe said. Yes, I said, grasping at what I thought was empathy. It's horrible, please, you have to talk to them. You're the only one they'll listen to. They'll do anything for you. Tell them they have to help. Please, Chloe, beg them for me. There was a long, heavy sigh on the other end of the line, a sigh of pure, unadulterated annoyance. Imani, you are really distracting me right now, she said, her voice dropping to a cold, irritated whisper. I am standing here in my haute couture gown, and you are calling me and crying about money. Do you have any idea how much pressure I am under? This is my special day, my one day, and you are trying to ruin it. The words were so cruel, so disconnected from reality, that I couldn't speak. Ruin it, I finally whispered. Chloe, your nephew is in the ICU. And what do you want me to do about it? She snapped. I already told you I'm in Paris. I can't deal with this right now. Why are you always so negative, Imani? Why does it always have to be about Leo's problems? You are bringing down my entire wedding experience. What? I have to go, Chloe said. I could hear the rustle of silk again as she moved. The designer is waiting for me. We will talk about this when I get back from the honeymoon. You just need to be more resourceful. Chloe, no, don't hang up. Please, he doesn't have until your honeymoon. But all I heard was the final definitive click. She had hung up on me. My sister, standing in a cloud of silk in Paris, had hung up on me while my son was fighting for his life. I sat there on the cold hospital floor, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead, empty silence. A week later, the ICU had become my world. The steady rhythmic beep, beep, beep of Leo's heart monitor was the soundtrack to my life. I sat in the hard plastic chair by his bed, my neck stiff, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. Leo was small and pale under the thin white hospital blanket, an IV line taped to his tiny hand. The Boston trial spot was gone, of course. The deadline had passed while my sister was picking out flowers in Paris. Dr. Evans had been kind, saying they would reevaluate other options. But we both knew what that meant. There were no other options. My phone plugged into the wall outlet buzzed with a notification. It was Instagram. I had been ignoring the world, but in a moment of numb exhaustion I picked it up. My thumb scrolled automatically. And then I saw it. My feed, which was usually quiet, exploded with a cascade of perfect, sun-drenched professional photographs. It was Chloe's wedding. The location tag read, Lake Como, Italy. The first photo was of Chloe and Trevor. She was in her haute couture gown. I remembered her mentioning the designer. A $20,000 dress. She looked stunning, like a movie star. They were kissing on a balcony overlooking the sparkling blue water, surrounded by an explosion of white roses and peonies. I scrolled. The next photo was the reception. A long, beautiful table set for over 200 people, under a canopy of twinkling lights. A 5-tiered cake adorned with sugar flowers. A champagne tower with crystal glasses stacked high, sparkling in the golden hour light. I scrolled. There was a video. A full 12-piece band was playing. A band I recognized from a popular late-night show. My parents had flown them in from the U.S. Guests in tuxedos and designer gowns were dancing, laughing, holding glasses of champagne. The scene was pure, unadulterated joy. Pure, unadulterated wealth. The number echoed in my head. $380,000. At least. Probably more. This was the no-budget limit my father had promised. My eyes scanned the tagged photos. I started to see faces I knew. My cousin, who had emailed me back about the GoFundMe saying, "So sorry, Imani, things are just too tight right now, sending thoughts and prayers." There he was, holding a cigar and a glass of scotch, laughing with my father. I saw my mother's friends from her charity boards, the ones who were so committed to helping children. They were all there sipping champagne, celebrating. I saw distant relatives I had emailed in desperation, begging for even $100 to help save my son's life. They had all ignored my email, but they had not ignored the gold-embossed invitation to Italy. The hypocrisy was suffocating. Every smiling face was a fresh betrayal. Every clinking glass felt like a nail in my son's coffin. I kept scrolling, a sick, morbid fascination, pulling me deeper into their perfect world. Past the photos of the food, the flowers, the sunset cruise. And then I stopped. It was a professional photo, perfectly framed. My parents. My father, Marcus, was in a custom-tailored tuxedo, looking proud and powerful. My mother, Denise, was in an elegant floor-length blue gown, her diamonds glittering. They were on the dance floor, locked in an embrace. But they weren't just posing, they were dancing. My mother's head was thrown back, her mouth wide with laughter. Pure, carefree, ecstatic laughter. My father was smiling down at her, a look of absolute contentment on his face. They looked happier than I had ever seen them. I looked at the photo, at their radiant joy, and from the bed beside me I heard the steady, lonely, painful beep, beep, beep of my son's heart. I stared at that one photo for a full minute, the image burning itself into my memory. It was my mother, Denise, laughing. A deep, genuine, head-thrown back laugh of pure joy. She was wrapped in my father's arms on the dance floor, her diamonds flashing, his face pressed against her hair. They looked like a couple without a care in the world. They looked happy. Then I read the caption. My mother herself had posted it just an hour ago. The words she chose were a special kind of cruelty. "So blessed," it read. "The whole family is together for Chloe's big day. It's moments like this you cherish forever. Hash, blessed. Hashash Lake Como. Family, everything. The whole family." My gaze lifted from the glowing screen of my phone. I looked at the pale, small boy sleeping in the hospital bed in front of me. My son, his tiny chest barely moving under the thin white blanket. The only sound in the room was the steady, lonely beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor that was tethered to his body. The whole family. I looked back at the phone, at my mother's laughing face, at my father's proud smile, at the 200 guests sipping champagne in the background, at the relatives who had sent thoughts and prayers, but no money, at the sister who had hung up on me. Family is everything. I felt a sudden violent wave of nausea. I lurched forward, dropping the phone onto the bed, and barely made it to the small trash can in the corner before I was sick. The hypocrisy was a physical poison. They weren't just celebrating, they were celebrating their completeness. They were celebrating a world that did not include me or my suffering or my dying child. We weren't just forgotten, we had been deliberately erased. We were the inconvenient secret, the drama that Chloe had mentioned, the negativity that would have ruined their perfect pictures. I stayed there for a long time, kneeling on the cold hospital floor, my head bowed. I thought I would cry again. I thought I would be consumed by the grief and the rage. But something else happened. The tears just stopped. The shaking in my hands subsided. The hollow, desperate ache in my chest didn't just disappear, it hardened. It solidified into something cold, heavy, and strong. It was as if all the pain and betrayal and humiliation had been burned away, leaving only the ashes of a cold, clear, and terrible resolve. I stood up slowly. I wiped my mouth. I walked back to the bed. I picked up my phone, the screen still glowing with their laughing faces. I looked at it one last time. At my mother. My father. My sister. Then I pressed the button on the side. The screen went black. The despair was gone. The panic was gone. The desperate need for them to love me, to see me, to help me. It was all gone. Replaced by a quiet, empty, and perfectly calm certainty. I would save my son, and I would do it alone. I must have sat there for hours just watching the steady green line of the heart monitor. The only sound was that beep and Leo's soft, labored breathing. The anger had burned away, leaving a cold, clear void. I was no longer grieving the family I wished I had. I was simply accepting the one I had, which was none. The door to the ICU room opened softly. It was Dr. Evans, his face etched with exhaustion. He had been on shift for what looked like days. "Imani," he said quietly, his eyes full of a pity I suddenly hated. "I'm so sorry. I just got off the phone with the team in Boston." I looked up at him, my body bracing for the next blow. "They gave away his spot, didn't they?" "Not yet," he said. "But the child who was next on the list, her condition has also deteriorated. They're trying to decide what to do. The board is meeting." He ran a hand over his face. "Imani, they need a final answer from you. They need the deposit. They've given you 24 hours, a final extension. After that, they have to give the spot to the other child. It's not a choice for them, it's an ethical obligation." 24 hours. My mind, which had been foggy with grief and rage, suddenly became sharp. All the emotion receded, replaced by the same analytical focus I used in the lab. I had 24 hours to get $90,000. My family had said no. GoFundMe had failed. I had sold everything I owned. I was out of conventional options, but I wasn't a conventional person. I looked at Dr. Evans. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. My voice was different. It didn't shake. It was flat, devoid of emotion. "You've done more than enough." He looked at me, surprised by my sudden calm. "Imani, is there anything? Is there anyone else you can call?" I stood up from the hard plastic chair. I walked over to Leo's bed. He was sleeping, his face pale and peaceful, his long eyelashes resting on his cheeks. He looked like a tiny, perfect angel. My angel. I gently brushed a stray curl of his hair off his forehead. My mother laughed while my son died. My father worried about his image. My sister worried about her dress. They had made their choice. Now I would make mine. I turned back to Dr. Evans. The analytical part of my brain, the researcher, the problem solver, took over completely. $90,000. 24 hours. I had one move left. One card I had been holding on to, one desperate company-killing, future-destroying move. "I will have the money," I said. The words came out hard like stones. Dr. Evans looked confused. "Imani, how? Did your family?" "No." I cut him off. "I'll get it." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3:15 p.m. "Tell the Boston team they will have confirmation of the $90,000 wire transfer by 4:15 p.m. "Imani, that's in 1 hour. How is that possible?" I walked past him to the door, pulling my phone from my back pocket. I didn't look at his kind, worried face. I couldn't. "Give me 1 hour," I said, my voice like ice. And I walked out of the room, my fingers already dialing the number for my lawyer. I didn't go back to Leo's room. I couldn't look at his sleeping face while I did this. I walked down the hall past the nurse's station and pushed open the heavy door to an emergency stairwell. The air was cold and smelled like concrete and bleach. I leaned against the cinder-block wall, my phone feeling heavy in my hand. I dialed the number I knew by heart. He picked up on the second ring. "Ben Carter speaking." Ben was my lawyer, my business lawyer, the only person on the planet who knew the other half of my life. "Ben, it's Imani." His voice immediately sharpened, losing its professional distance. "Imani, what's wrong? You never call me on this line during the day." "Is it Leo?" "It's bad, Ben," I said, my voice flat. The tears were gone now, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He's in the ICU. He had a severe arrhythmia. The doctors say he's out of time. I heard him swear under his breath. What do you need? The funding. The Series A round isn't closed, but I can call the investors. I don't have time for a funding round, Ben. I cut him off. I have 24 hours to get $90,000 to the trial team in Boston. I need to sell. There was a dead heavy silence on the line. Sell what? He finally asked, though he already knew the answer. Everything, I said. Sell Chimera, call Vireo Pharma. Tell them they can have it all. The patents, the research, everything. Just give me their lowball offer. I need the money wired by 4 p.m. Imani, no, he protested. Their offer is $500,000. It's an insult. Your delivery system patents alone are worth 50 million, maybe more. We just have to hold out. I don't have time to hold out. I have 24 hours or my son dies. I need the money, Ben. I don't care about the company. Not anymore. This was the secret I had kept for 8 years. To my family, I was Imani Jackson, the spectacular failure. The daughter who had shamed them by dropping out of Georgetown Law School. My father, Marcus, had spent a fortune and pulled every string he had to get me into that program. He wanted a lawyer daughter to cement the family's legacy. When I walked away in my second year telling him I couldn't be a corporate lawyer, that my passion was genetics, he was furious. He told me I was throwing my life away on a childish hobby. So I let him believe it. I let them all believe I was just a struggling, underpaid postdoc researcher at UCLA. I let them scoff at my old car and my small apartment. I let them see me as the negative one, the failure, the charity case in the family. Because while I worked my hobby of a day job, I was spending every night, every weekend, every spare dollar I had, building my real life's work. 8 years ago, I had founded Chimera Therapeutics. It was just me, a laptop, and a rented corner of a university lab. I named it Chimera after the mythological beast made of different parts because my goal was to rebuild the human genome. I was a founder. I was a CEO. And I was on the verge of a breakthrough that would change medicine forever. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. The technology I was developing wasn't just for anyone. It was a revolutionary new gene delivery system, a biological vehicle that could carry repaired DNA directly into damaged heart cells. I was building it to cure the exact rare genetic disorder that was currently killing my son. I had poured my entire soul into Chimera Therapeutics. Every late night, every missed social event, every dollar I didn't spend on myself went directly into funding my research. The company was on the absolute brink of a breakthrough. We had perfected the delivery mechanism on animal models. We were this close. The irony was agonizing. The $90,000 I had begged my parents for wasn't just a random number for the Boston trial. It was the exact amount I needed for the final round of funding. It was the last bit of capital I needed to partner with a lab and get clearance to start the clinical trial myself on my terms using my technology to save my son. I had hoped with a desperate, foolish optimism that I could convince my parents to invest, that I could finally reveal my life's work and have them see at last that I wasn't a failure, that I was on the verge of something incredible. I had imagined a moment where my father Marcus would look at my data, his eyes wide with shock and respect, and say, "Imani, I was wrong. This is brilliant." But that fantasy had evaporated in their cold, sterile living room. When they refused me, when they chose a wedding deposit over my son's life, they didn't just deny me as a daughter. They had, without knowing it, killed my company. I had no choice. I had spent the last few weeks, ever since Leo's diagnosis got worse, frantically and quietly, trying to sell Chimera. I had pitched to venture capital firms to rival biotech companies, to anyone who would listen. But they all knew I was desperate. They knew my timeline was collapsing. The offers were insulting. They wanted to bleed me dry, to wait until I was forced to give it all away for nothing. There was only one serious offer on the table. A lowball predatory bid from Vireo Pharma, a massive soulless pharmaceutical conglomerate. They were the ones who had tried to steal my research assistants and poach my data for years. They knew exactly what I had, and they knew I was in a corner. Their standing offer was $500,000. $500,000 for a patent portfolio that would one day be worth billions. It was highway robbery. It was a tenth of a cent on the dollar. It was the most insulting predatory offer I had ever received. And it was the only one I had. It was enough to pay for the Boston trial. It was enough to cover Leo's follow-up care. It was enough to pay for the flight and the living expenses while we were there. It was just enough. I had been holding out, praying for another option, praying my parents would come through. But that door had been slammed and locked. I was out of time. My son was dying, and my sister was trying on wedding dresses. Virio Pharma had me. They knew I had no other move. Ben, I said again, my voice like stone. Call Peterson at Virio. Tell him he wins. $500,000. But I have one condition. The money has to be in my account in 50 minutes. Ben, call Peterson at Virio. Tell him he wins. Tell him I'm selling. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. When Ben finally spoke, his voice was tight with disbelief and professional horror. Imani, no. You can't. Not like this. Their offer is criminal. It's $500,000 for a patent portfolio that will be worth billions. Billions, Imani. This is your life's work. We just need more time. A real investor. I don't have more time, Ben, I shouted into the cold concrete stairwell. My voice echoed back at me, sharp and broken. Do you understand me? I have less than 24 hours or my son dies. My son. My life's work is lying in an ICU bed on the 5th floor and he is dying. What is a patent portfolio worth if he's not here? What is anything worth? The tears I thought were gone rushed back, hot and angry. I need $500,000. I need it for the $90,000 deposit. I need it for the air ambulance to Boston. I need it for the follow-up care that insurance won't cover. I need it to live on while I'm not working. That is the price. And I need it now. Ben was quiet. I could hear him breathing. Imani, this will destroy you, he said softly. You will be selling away your entire future. You will have to start over from nothing. They will own everything you've built. They will take credit for your genius. I looked through the small wire glass window in the stairwell door down the hall toward the ICU. I could just see the nurses' station, the soft pale green of the walls. They can have it, I whispered. They can have the company. They can have the patents. They can take the credit. I don't care. I am trading my future for my son's future. It's not even a choice. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my resolve hardening into steel. Call him, Ben. Call Peterson. Tell him the deal is done. But I have one condition. The $500,000 must be wired and cleared in my account within the hour. 50 minutes. Not a second more. If they can't do that, the deal is off. And my son. Just get it done, Ben. Please, get it done. I hung up the phone before he could argue again. I didn't wait for his reply. My hand slid down the cold painted cinder block wall until I was crouching on the floor, my head against my knees. I had just sold my other child. My 8 years of genius, my sleepless nights, my sacrifice. I had sold it all to a corporate predator for pennies. But I didn't care. I had just bought my son's life. My phone buzzed on my lap. It was Ben. His voice was heavy, hollow. It's done, he said. The wire transfer is complete. $500,000 is in your account. I opened my banking app. The number stared back at me. It felt like blood money. The signature documents are in your email, Ben continued. Imani, once you sign these, it's over. Chimera Therapeutics. All the patents, all your research, it all belongs to Virio Pharma. Are you absolutely 100% sure? I looked through the small window into Leo's room. He was sleeping. Yes, I said, my voice firm. I'm sure. The email was already there. I opened the electronic document. My name was at the bottom. Imani Jackson, founder and CEO. I tapped the signature box. It was finished. 8 years of my life, my genius, my future, signed away in a cold hospital hallway. I felt a sharp stabbing pain, as if a part of me had just died. I pushed it down. There was no time to mourn. I walked back into the ICU, my footsteps echoing with purpose. "He's cleared for transport," I announced to the charge nurse, showing her the proof of the wire transfer to the Boston team. "The deposit is paid. The air ambulance will be at Santa Monica Airport in 2 hours." The nurses moved with quiet efficiency. I packed Leo's small backpack myself. His favorite stuffed giraffe, his worn blue blanket, the one picture we had of just us laughing on the pier. A nurse gently removed the IV line from his hand. I bundled Leo, still groggy and frail, in my arms. He felt impossibly light. I carried him out of the ICU, past the nurse's station, and out of the cold, sterile hospital doors, into the bright, unforgiving California sunlight. The ambulance was waiting. As we boarded the small medevac plane at the airport, I looked out the window. I saw the hazy Los Angeles skyline in the distance, the city that held my parents, my sister, and the company that was no longer mine. I had lost everything: my family, my career, my financial future. But as the plane's engines roared to life, I looked down at the small, warm boy sleeping in my arms. His head was resting against my chest. He was alive. He was going to live. I had lost my company, but I had saved my son. I turned away from the window, away from the life that had rejected me, and I never looked back. 6 months in Boston felt like 6 years. We lived in a small, sterile medical apartment near the hospital, but it had all been worth it. The experimental gene therapy, the one I had sold my future to afford, had worked. Leo, my now 8-year-old son, was not just stable. He was thriving. The doctors had used the word remission. He was running. He was laughing. The terrifying blue tinge that had haunted his lips was gone, replaced by the healthy, rosy color of a normal child. We returned to our small apartment in Los Angeles. It felt strange to be back, like ghosts walking into a life we no longer lived. I was adjusting to a new hollow reality. My company Chimera was gone. My patents now belonged to Vireo Pharma. I was living off the rapidly dwindling remainder of the $500,000 I'd received from the sale, trying to figure out what came next. The knock on the door was sharp, impatient, and unfamiliar. I opened it, and my breath caught. My parents, Marcus and Denise, stood there. Beside them, looking bored, was my sister Chloe. It was the first time I had seen them in person since the day I begged them for my son's life. My mother, Denise, pushed a massive gift basket into my hands. It was wrapped in glittering cellophane and overflowing with expensive cheeses, fruits, and a large plush teddy bear. It was a prop, a shield. "Well," my mother said, her voice artificially bright, "we heard you were back. We came to see Leo." I stepped aside, my body rigid. "He's in his room." They walked in, their eyes scanning my small, clean apartment with barely concealed disdain. Chloe, clearly back from her extravagant Italian honeymoon, didn't even bother to look around. She was too busy scrolling through her phone. Leo came out of his room, his eyes wide. He looked at these strangers. He didn't remember them. "My goodness, he's grown," Denise said, offering him the teddy bear, which he took reluctantly. My father, Marcus, cleared his throat. He hadn't sat down. "So," he said, his voice clipped, "we heard you went through with that sale, sold that little project of yours." I tensed. "It was a company, Dad, and it saved Leo's life." "A reckless gamble, if you ask me," Marcus said, shaking his head. He looked genuinely disappointed, not in his own actions but in mine. "You had that stable fellowship at UCLA, you threw away your law degree, and now you've thrown away your company. You sold your entire future, Imani, for one long-shot bet. It was irresponsible. I stared at him. The arrogance, the audacity. He was standing here in my home after refusing to help, and he was judging the sacrifice I had made. It wasn't a bet, I said, my voice low and shaking. It was the only move I had. A move I had to make because you refused to help. My mother Denise jumped in, her voice sharp. Don't you dare take that tone with your father, Imani. We did what we thought was best, and speaking of which… She looked around the room, her nose wrinkled in disgust. We heard about that GoFundMe campaign. Your Aunt Janelle told everyone. How could you… How could I what? I asked. Try to save my son. You could have been discreet, she hissed. But no, you had to air our family business for the entire world. Begging like common, like beggars. Do you know how embarrassing that was for us? Marcus had to answer questions about it at the country club. People thought we were destitute. That was it. That was the final piece. They weren't angry I had asked. They were angry that my desperation had become public, that it had tarnished their image. I looked at Leo, who had retreated to the hallway, clutching the bear, his eyes wide with fear. He was sensing the tension. They had come here into my home after abandoning my child, and their only concern was their social standing. My cold, calm resolve from the hospital returned. This was my space. This was Leo's safe space, and they were not welcome in it. I walked to my front door and pulled it wide open. Marcus looked confused. What are you doing? I looked at my mother, at my father, at my sister, who hadn't even looked up from her phone. Get out! My command, get out, hung in the air of my small apartment. It was the first time in my 32 years I had ever used that tone with my parents. My sister Chloe looked genuinely shocked, her hand frozen on her phone. My mother Denise gasped, her hand flying to her pearls in a gesture of exaggerated offense, but it was my father Marcus who finally exploded. His face, which had been pale with shock, turned a deep, furious red. How dare you? He boomed, his voice echoing in my small living room. How dare you speak to your mother and me that way in your own home? It is my home, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, and you are not welcome in it. We are your parents, he shouted, taking a step toward me. After everything we've done for you, after the education we gave you, the life we provided, we put you through the best schools, Imani. We paid for Georgetown Law, which you threw away. We gave you every advantage, every opportunity to be someone, and this is how you repay us. You stand there and speak to us like we are strangers. You treated me like a stranger. I replied, my voice as cold and hard as the anger that had solidified inside me. You treated my son like a stranger. So yes, that is what you are. He was speechless, his mouth opening and closing. He was not used to being challenged. He was used to his word being law. I am not repaying you for everything you've done, I said, correcting him. I am responding to everything you didn't do. I took a step toward him, and for the first time in my life I saw my father flinch. You didn't help. You didn't answer my calls. You didn't care that my son was dying. You chose a party. You chose a wedding. You chose your image over his life. So no, you don't get to come in here and talk about what you've done for me. I pointed back to the door I was still holding open. As far as I'm concerned, Leo and we don't have a family. You, Mom, Chloe. You all died to us 6 months ago. So please get out of my apartment. Don't call me. Don't email me. Don't ever contact me again. My mother Denise finally found her voice. The shock was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. She stepped in front of my father, her eyes narrowing. You will regret this, Imani, she hissed. Her voice was low and far more threatening than my father's yelling. You think you're strong now. You think you've won some victory here. But you are making a terrible, terrible mistake. You're emotional, you're unstable, you've always been. She took a step closer to me. You think you can just cut us out. You think you can survive in this world all alone with no one to back you up. You will need family one day, Imani. You will fail again. You always do. And when you come crawling back to us, when you finally realize what you've thrown away, that door will be locked. I looked at her perfectly styled hair, her expensive silk blouse, her cold, merciless eyes. She was threatening me. She was promising my future failure. I just smiled. It was a cold smile, one I didn't recognize. I needed a family 6 months ago, I said. I needed them when I was on the floor of a hospital begging for my son's life. But you weren't there. You were in Italy. And with that, I slammed the door in their faces. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned against the door, my heart hammering, but for the first time in my entire life, I felt free. 7 years passed. Life looked very different for me at 38. I was no longer the struggling, underpaid postdoc researcher. After selling Chimera, the terms of the acquisition agreement had been brutal and clear. I didn't just sell the patents. Vireo Pharma wanted the brain that created them. I was forced to accept a position at their massive Los Angeles campus as a senior scientist, a condition of the sale to ensure a smooth transition of my technology. They thought they were just buying a company. What they got was my genius, and I made myself indispensable. I climbed the ladder. I climbed it fast. I went from senior scientist to lab manager to department head and finally to the director of research and development. I was now one of the highest-ranking women in the entire corporation. I was financially secure for the first time in my life. I traded my small, cramped apartment for a modern penthouse in downtown LA, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city lights. I wore tailored suits. I drove a car that started every time I turned the key. I was successful. I was powerful. But I was also living in a gilded cage. Every day I walked into a state-of-the-art laboratory that my technology had built. I led a team of brilliant researchers who were all working to develop my patents, my delivery system, my life's work. But all the credit, all the profits, all the glory went to Vireo Pharma. My name was never on the press releases. I was the ghost in their machine. My colleagues respected me, even feared me a little. I was known as Dr. Jackson, the intense, no-nonsense director who demanded perfection. They had no idea I was the one who had created the very technology we were developing. They had no idea about the bitterness I swallowed every morning, the cold, hard knot in my stomach, as I worked to make another corporation billions off the genius I had sold to save my son. It was a price I had paid, but I never forgot the cost. And through all of it, the rise, the success, the new life, one thing remained constant. I had not spoken a single word to my mother, my father, or my sister in 7 years. They did not exist. Leo was 14. He was no longer the small, frail child I carried onto that medevac plane. He was tall, taller than me by a few inches, with the lean, powerful build of the track athlete he had become. He was healthy. He was vibrant. The gene therapy had not just saved him, it had given him a life I could only have dreamed of. He was first in his class, a math and science prodigy, and the fastest sprinter on his high school's track team. I watched him, sometimes just watched him breathing, running, or even sleeping, and the sheer miracle of his health would overwhelm me. He knew everything. I had made the decision early on that I would never lie to him. As he grew, he asked questions, and I answered them. He knew his father had left. He knew his grandparents had been asked for help and had refused. He knew they had chosen his aunt's wedding in Italy over his life. He knew the company I worked for, Vireo Pharma, was built on the technology I had created and sold to save him. He understood the sacrifice not as a burden, but as a transaction. He knew what I had paid for him. And because of that, our bond was absolute. He had no memory of Marcus or Denise or Chloe. He had no emotional attachment to them. They were not grandparents or aunt. They were just people. Characters in a story his mother had told him. Sometimes he would see them, He'd be scrolling through his great-aunt Janelle's Facebook page, the only family member we kept in contact with. He would pause on a photo. There they'd be Marcus and Denise at their country club smiling at a golf tournament. There was Chloe and her white husband Trevor posing with their two perfect children Maya and Jackson in matching Christmas sweaters. Leo would just look at the screen, his expression neutral. He felt no connection, no anger, no sense of loss. They were strangers. Faint pictures of a life that had nothing to do with him, a family that had looked at him when he was dying and had chosen to look away. He was my entire world, and I was his. We were a complete unit, a fortress of two, built on a foundation of sacrifice, resilience, and a love that had been tested and proven absolute. We didn't need anyone else. My sister Chloe was 35 now. Her life, at least according to her Instagram feed, was flawless. She and her husband Trevor had bought a sprawling modern home in a wealthy LA suburb. They had two beautiful children, a girl named Maya, who was 6, and a son Jackson, who was 4. Their life was a performance of casual, effortless wealth. One weekend they were skiing in Aspen. The next, they were on a beach in Cabo. Chloe was on the junior board of 3 different charities, and her social media was a carefully curated reel of fundraiser galas, polo matches, and perfect family portraits where everyone wore coordinating shades of beige. My parents, Marcus and Denise, had fully embraced their retirement. They sold the big house in View Park and bought an even bigger one inside a gated country club in Palm Springs. Their days, as far as I could tell, were a predictable cycle of golf tournaments, catered dinners, and poolside cocktails. They doted on Chloe's children. Their social media was a shrine to their perfect grandchildren. There were pictures of Marcus teaching Jackson how to hold a golf club, photos of Denise taking Maya for her first ballet lesson. Every post was captioned with #blessed or #grandparent life or #legacy. In this new, perfect documented history of the Jackson family, Leo and I did not exist. We had been completely and totally erased. There were no pictures of me, no mention of Leo. It was as if I had never been born, as if my son had never existed, never gotten sick, never needed them. We were the family's secret, the failed branch that had been pruned away to let the golden branch flourish. For 7 years I watched this from a cold distance. I built my career. I raised my son. I accepted my exile. I lived with the knowledge that to them I was nothing, and I might have lived that way forever. Until one day. I was in a sterile, high-rise boardroom 20 floors above the LA traffic. It was a tense quarterly review meeting at Vireo Pharma. Peterson, our CEO, was grilling the finance department about R&D spending, and I was next. I was Dr. Imani Jackson, now the Director of Research and Development. I wore a steel gray suit, and my hair was pulled back into a severe bun. I was the picture of corporate authority. My phone set to silent on the polished table lit up. A call. I glanced down. Aunt Janelle. My heart stopped. Aunt Janelle never called me during work hours, ever. She knew my schedule. She knew the pressure I was under. A call from her on a Tuesday at 11 a.m. meant only one thing. Something was terribly wrong. Peterson was in the middle of a sentence about profit margins. Dr. Jackson, your budget projections for the next quarter. Excuse me, I said, my voice cutting through his. The entire table of 12 executives turned to stare at me. I never interrupted Peterson. I have to take this. It's an emergency. I didn't wait for permission. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and walked out of the boardroom, my heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. I shut the glass door behind me and leaned against the wall, my hands shaking. Auntie, I answered. Imani. Her voice was broken. She was sobbing. A raw, ragged sound that terrified me. Aunt Janelle was the strongest woman I knew. She didn't cry. Auntie, what is it? What's wrong? Is it Leo? Is he okay? No, baby, no, Leo's fine, she choked out. It's, oh, Imani, it's Chloe's little girl. It's Maya. I froze. Chloe. My sister. I hadn't said her name in 7 years. What about Maya? I asked, my voice suddenly cold. She's sick, Imani. Janelle wept. She's at UCLA at the Children's Hospital. They just got the diagnosis. She collapsed at her preschool. They said it's her heart. They said it's a rare genetic disease and, oh God, Imani, it sounds just like Leo. The boardroom, the CEO, the budget reports, it all dissolved. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Of course, it was genetic. I was a geneticist. I had known academically that this was a possibility. I knew the dominant gene markers. I knew there was a 50% chance Leo had gotten it from me, and a 50% chance I had gotten it from one of my parents, which meant there was a 50% chance Chloe could be a carrier, a 50% chance her children could have it. I had pushed that knowledge down. I had buried it because to think about it was to think about them, and I had built my entire life on not thinking about them. But now, here it was. The past wasn't buried. It had just been waiting. I stood there staring at the panoramic view of the city, but seeing nothing. My niece. A 6-year-old girl I had never met. She was in the same hospital where I had begged for my son's life, and she had his disease. Where are they? I asked Aunt Janelle, my voice all business. The shock was already fading, replaced by the cold, analytical focus I lived in now. UCLA Children's Hospital, Janelle cried. Floor 5, Chloe is... She's not handling it well, Imani. She's hysterical. And your mother, Denise, is just... frozen. Marcus is yelling at everyone. I'll call you back, I said and hung up. I didn't go back to the boardroom. I walked straight to the elevator, my heels clicking a steady, fast rhythm on the marble. I didn't go down. I went up. Up to my office, the corner suite with the panoramic view. I sat at my desk and logged into my terminal. As the Director of Research and Development at Vireo Pharma, I had high-level clearance. I had access to clinical trial databases and patient enrollment systems across the country. My work required it. Aunt Janelle had already texted me Maya's full name and date of birth. I typed the information into the UCLA patient portal using my administrative override. A box popped up, HIPAA warning, confirm authorization for access. I clicked confirm. A moment later, I had verbal authorization from Janelle, who was at the hospital. The file loaded. It was all there. I scrolled through the EKG readings, the blood panels, the genetic markers. My breath caught. It wasn't just like Leo's. It was identical. The exact same rare genetic mutation, arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, my research, my specialty, the thing I had sacrificed my life to chase. I kept reading. I saw the notes from Maya's cardiologist, a Dr. Chen. I saw the progression. Patient unresponsive to standard beta blockers. Arrhythmia continues despite amiodarone. Prognosis poor. My family was in panic. I could feel it through the cold digital text on the screen. The doctor's notes indicated Maya was in heart failure. The standard treatments, the ones that had failed Leo 7 years ago, were failing her too. Then I saw the final entry. The consultation note from Dr. Chen, time-stamped just 1 hour ago. Patient's family briefed on lack of conventional options. Parents Marcus and Denise Jackson, Chloe Thornton, informed of the only viable therapeutic path. I leaned in my eyes, scanning the text, my heart hammering a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. Only one hope for survival, the note read. Referral submitted for compassionate use access to Chimera V gene therapy pending production and availability. Vireo Pharma is the sole manufacturer. I have informed the family that this is the only potential cure. I leaned back in my chair. The leather creaked in the silent office. Chimera V, my technology, my life's work. The company I had sold, the cure I had created, now owned by Vireo. My family, who had abandoned me, who had chosen a wedding over my son's life, was now desperately seeking the very miracle I had invented. They were banging on the door of the company I now helped run. They were demanding access to the cure that bore my fingerprints all over it. The irony was so thick, so profound, I almost choked on it. Their only hope, Chimera V. I didn't go back to the boardroom. I didn't call my aunt. I just stood up from my desk, walked out of my office, and took the private elevator down to the research labs. My key card granted me access. The labs were my domain. I walked through the humming, sterile corridors past high-tech genomic sequencers and bioreactors until I reached Lab 3B. I swiped my card and stepped inside. This was the heart of the Chimera V project. My project. My technology. I looked at the complex machinery, the glowing monitors displaying genetic codes. Vireo Pharma had poured tens of millions of dollars into this room, all based on the research I had sold them for a pittance. They were running tests, finalizing the therapy, preparing for the revolutionary launch that would make their stock price explode. But there was one problem. They were failing. The test results on the monitors, the ones I had access to as director, were all failures. The therapy was created. The gene was sound. But it wasn't working. It wasn't getting into the heart cells. I knew why. And this was the secret. This was the payoff. This was the ace I had kept hidden up my sleeve for 7 long years. I wasn't just smart. I was wise. When I sold Chimera Therapeutics in that desperate, grief-stricken 24-hour fire sale, I was broken, but I was not stupid. Ben, my lawyer, had been frantic. The Vireo legal team had been arrogant, rushing the deal, knowing they had me over a barrel. In their haste, in their arrogance, they had made a mistake. They had acquired my entire portfolio, 99% of my life's work. The patents for the gene splicing technique. The patents for the stabilizing compound. But they missed one. One small, seemingly insignificant patent. It was registered not under Chimera Therapeutics, but under a separate anonymous LLC I had created 2 years prior. A shell company named Leogen Holdings, named for my son. The Vireo lawyers, in their rush to acquire the cure, had missed the key. Because that's what the patent was. It wasn't the cure itself, it was the delivery mechanism. It was the biological equivalent of a microscopic heat-seeking missile. The one and only proprietary viral vector I had engineered that could bypass the body's immune response target, only the damaged cells of the human heart, and deliver the gene therapy payload exactly where it needed to go. Without my patent, their multi-billion-dollar cure was useless. It was like having the world's most powerful bullet, but no gun to fire it. Vireo Pharma had the cure. But I, Imani Jackson, the failure, the postdoc, the woman they had all written off. I owned the key. The only key. Vireo Pharma had the cure. But they had no way to deliver it. I knew this because as the director of R&D, I had personally overseen the last 7 years of their failed attempts. I watched them spend millions of dollars trying to reverse engineer my delivery mechanism. I watched them hit a wall time and time again as their own viral vectors were destroyed by the body's immune system before they could ever reach the heart. I watched, and I said nothing. About 2 years ago, their corporate acquisition team finally figured it out. They traced the patent for the delivery system to my shell company, Leogen Holdings. The offers started coming in. At first they were modest, a few million. Then as their desperation grew, the numbers climbed. 10 million, 50 million. I rejected every single one. I never gave a reason. I just instructed Ben, my lawyer, to send a 1-sentence reply: Leogen Holdings is not interested in a sale at this time. My behavior baffled the Vireo executive board. Peterson, the CEO, had complained about it to me in meetings, having no idea he was complaining to the owner. "Who is this Leogen Holdings?" he'd grumbled. "They're sitting on a gold mine. They're blocking a life-saving drug. It's unethical." I had just sipped my coffee and nodded, my expression carefully neutral. It is a difficult situation, sir. But it wasn't unethical. It was strategic. I hadn't held on to that patent out of pure spite. I held it because I was a geneticist. I knew the dominant gene markers. I knew the odds. I knew that my parents, in their quest for a perfect family, had ignored the genetic time bomb ticking in our bloodline. The same disease that had struck Leo had a 50% chance of being passed down. I knew that Chloe, my golden child sister, was a carrier. I had run her DNA from a coffee cup she left at my apartment years ago before the final break. I knew. And I knew that if she had children, there was a 50-50 chance she would pass that gene to them. For 7 years I had waited. I had watched her post pictures of her perfect children on Instagram, Maya and then Jackson. With every birthday photo I held my breath, wondering when it would happen, wondering if they would be the lucky ones who escaped the genetic lottery. Now the waiting was over. Maya was 6 years old, and the time bomb had just gone off. Virio Pharma couldn't make the cure. My family desperately needed the cure. And I, Imani Jackson, the failure, the outcast, the woman they had left to beg for her son's life, was the only person in the world who could give it to them. I stood in my lab looking at the failed test results on the screen. The entire multi-billion-dollar project was dead in the water. All because of one patent. My patent. My niece Maya's life was not in the hands of Virio Pharma. It was not in the hands of the doctors at UCLA. It was not in the hands of my parents or their money. It was in mine. And I finally understood what I had been waiting for all these years. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. My phone buzzed on my desk, a sharp, intrusive summons. It was a text from Peterson, the CEO of Virio Pharma. Main boardroom. 10 minutes. Urgent. I didn't flinch. I knew exactly what this was about. The timing was too perfect. I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my dark gray suit jacket, and walked out of my office. I was no longer Imani, the desperate mother. I was Dr. Jackson, the director of R&D, and I was walking into a negotiation I had been preparing for 7 years. When I entered the main boardroom, the atmosphere was electric. Peterson was at the head of the long, polished table. He was a decisive, sharp man in his late 50s, the kind of CEO who saw everything in terms of profit loss and leverage. Our chief legal counsel, Mark, was there, along with the head of public relations. This was a crisis meeting. "Ah, Dr. Jackson," Peterson said, not waiting for me to sit. "We have a situation, a massive opportunity and a massive headache." I took my seat, placing my tablet on the table. "Go on." "We just received a call routed through the mayor's office, no less," Peterson began. "It's from a family, the Jackson family, Marcus and Denise Jackson." He glanced at his notes. "It seems their 6-year-old granddaughter Maya is at UCLA. She has that rare genetic cardiomyopathy, the one Chimera V is designed for." I kept my face a perfect neutral mask. I just stared at him. "They are highly motivated," Peterson continued, a predatory gleam in his eye that I recognized all too well. "They're an old money family here in LA, prominent. They told our people, and I quote, they will pay absolutely anything. They are offering an 8-figure donation to the company on top of the cost of the therapy just to get their granddaughter moved to the top of the compassionate use list." The PR woman nodded. "This is a massive PR win, Peterson. A high-profile wealthy family, a miracle cure. It's the launch story we've been dreaming of. It's clean, it's emotional, it's perfect." I let the silence hang in the room. Peterson looked at me. "Dr. Jackson, your thoughts. You're the head of the project." "We can't," I said simply. The lawyer Mark shifted in his seat. "Dr. Mr. Peterson means we need to prioritize the resources." "No." I cut him off, my voice sharp. "I mean, we can't. We have no viable product. The gene therapy is inert. The delivery mechanism is failing in every single simulation. We cannot administer a therapy that doesn't work. We are nowhere near a launch." Peterson slammed his hand on the table, his face flushing. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the problem, that damn shell company Leogen Holdings. They've been stonewalling us for 2 years. This is the moment to force their hand. We'll sue them. We'll get an injunction. We'll claim humanitarian grounds. We've tried, the lawyer said wearily. And we failed. Their patent on the delivery mechanism is ironclad. We can't move without them. Peterson stood up and began to pace. He was furious. Well, this is where it gets interesting. This is where you come in, Jackson. I raised an eyebrow. How so? He stopped pacing and pointed at me. The Jacksons, they know you. I'm aware of the family, yes, I said noncommittally. They're prominent in the community. No, not of them. They know you. They told the mayor's office that you were family. They specifically invoked your name. They said our daughter Dr. Imani Jackson is your director of R&D. We demand that she use her influence and her position to get our granddaughter this cure immediately. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it. After 7 years of erasure of being a non-person, I was suddenly their daughter again. The daughter they needed. The daughter they could use as a lever to get what they wanted. Peterson was looking at me expecting an answer, expecting me to confirm this powerful connection, expecting me to pick up the phone call, Mommy and Daddy, and fix this. I leaned back in my leather chair. I looked at the CEO. I looked at the lawyer. I let the silence stretch, filling the room with tension. Then I spoke. They're lying. I don't have a family. Peterson stared at me, his sharp, executive gaze filled with confusion. The public relations woman and the lawyer Mark looked back and forth between us, sensing the corporate strategy session had just become deeply, dangerously personal. What do you mean you don't have a family, Jackson? Peterson asked. His voice was sharp. He hated ambiguity. The records are clear. Her name is Chloe Thornton, maiden name Jackson. You are Imani Jackson. She is your sister. Are you telling me the mayor's office and our background checks are wrong? I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the polished mahogany table. The room was silent. Oh, she's my sister, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the room. And Marcus and Denise Jackson are my parents. But they are lying to you. Peterson looked annoyed. Lying about what? This is a simple family connection. This is leverage we can use to get that Leogen patent. They are lying. I interrupted, my voice cutting through his. When they say I am their daughter, they gave up that right 7 years ago. The lawyer Mark started to speak. Dr. Jackson, perhaps these personal matters are best left. These personal matters, I said, turning my gaze to him, are the only thing that matters. They are the reason you don't have a product. They are the reason Chimera Vi is failing in your labs. And they are the reason Peterson is about to lose this perfect PR opportunity. Peterson held up a hand, silencing Mark. He looked back at me. His eyes were cold, assessing. He was a capitalist, a shark. He didn't care about my feelings, but he cared about information. He cared about risk, and he smelled both. Explain, he commanded. And so I did. I told him everything. I laid out the story not as a broken-hearted daughter, but as a clinical analyst presenting a case study in betrayal. 7 years ago, I began, my voice steady. My son Leo was diagnosed with the exact same rare genetic cardiomyopathy that Maya Jackson now has. It's a dominant gene in our family line. I told them about the experimental trial in Boston. I told them the price. $90,000, I said. That was the deposit. I was a postdoc researcher. I didn't have it. I went to my parents, Marcus and Denise, and I begged them. I begged them for a loan to save their grandson's life. Peterson was listening intently now, his mind clearly working, processing the data. They refused, I stated. My father told me my son was a bad investment. He told me I was unrealistic. My mother said I was too emotional and that they couldn't risk their retirement fund on a gamble. They told me. I paused, letting the words land, that I should start a GoFundMe, because my son's dying was an embarrassment to their public image. The PR woman audibly gasped. Peterson's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. That's not the end of the story, I continued. As they were turning me away, my sister Chloe arrived. She was planning her wedding, and my parents, the ones who didn't have $90,000 to save Leo, announced they were giving her an unlimited budget. I left their house, and as I was walking away, I heard my mother promise Chloe a $380,000 deposit for a resort in Italy for the wedding. Peterson, the ultimate capitalist, understood this. He understood numbers. He understood priorities. He was stunned not by the lack of love, but by the sheer cold-blooded cruelty of the transaction. My son was in the ICU. I went on, my voice dropping. My sister hung up on me from her dress fitting in Paris. My parents were at Lake Como posting pictures on Instagram captioned, "Family is everything." I was alone. I had 24 hours to get the money. I turned my gaze directly to Peterson. So I made a choice. I sold my company, Chimera Therapeutics. I sold my entire life's work. I sold my patents, my research, my future, to you. The realization hit Peterson like a physical shock. He looked at the lawyer, then back at me. That was you, the desperate seller, the one Ben Carter represented. That was me, I confirmed. I sold you a multi-billion-dollar technology portfolio for $500,000 in cash because I needed $90,000 to get my son on a plane to Boston. I sold my genius to you so I could pay for the miracle my family refused. Peterson stood up. He walked to the window looking out over the city. He was connecting the dots, the timeline, the technology, the desperation. And now, I said, my voice quiet, they've come knocking. Because their child is sick, and they need the cure I invented, the cure I sold to you. Peterson turned back to me, his mind clearly made up. Then it's simple. We have them. We use their desperation, we get the Leogen patent, we save the girl, and we launch the product. It's a win-win. I let him finish. I let the silence settle in the room again. No, Mr. Peterson, I said softly. It's not that simple. He frowned. What do you mean? I said, leaning forward one last time. After 7 years and tens of millions of dollars, you still can't manufacture Chimera V, can you? Your labs are failing. Your tests are inconclusive. All because you're missing one last piece of the puzzle. I looked him dead in the eye. You're missing the delivery mechanism. You're missing the key. And you can't buy it. Because, I finished, I own that patent, my patent. I left the Vireo Pharma Tower as the sun was setting, painting the Los Angeles sky in shades of orange and bruised purple. I drove home, not to the small apartment they had last seen, but to the high-rise penthouse I now owned. My hands were steady on the wheel of my car, a Tesla Model S, not a 2008 Corolla. The entire drive I felt nothing, not joy, not satisfaction, just a cold, heavy certainty. The wheel had turned. When I pulled into the private garage, the valet who knew me as Dr. Jackson rushed to open my door. Good evening, Dr. Jackson. You have guests. They've been waiting for you in the lobby for over an hour. I know, I said, handing him my keys. Send them up. I took the private elevator, the one that opened directly into my apartment. As the car ascended, I watched my reflection in the polished steel doors. I looked at the woman staring back. The severe bun, the steel gray suit, the cold, tired eyes. This was the woman my family had created. This was the woman who now held all the cards. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and there they were. They were standing in the small private foyer outside my front door. All 4 of them. My father Marcus, my mother Denise, my sister Chloe, her husband Trevor. It was the first time I had seen them all together in 7 years. They looked old. That was my first thought. The 7 years had been kind to me in my success, but cruel to them in their comfort. My father Marcus was no longer the imposing banker. He looked diminished, his expensive suit hanging slightly loose, his posture stooped. My mother Denise had a web of fine lines around her eyes and mouth that her Palm Springs tan couldn't hide. She was clutching her designer handbag like a shield. Trevor looked impatient and disgusted. His arms crossed his foot, tapping. But it was Chloe who shocked me. The golden child, the perfect, polished, beautiful sister, was a wreck. Her hair was a mess pulled back in a haphazard ponytail. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face puffy from crying. She was wearing designer athleisure, but it was rumpled as if she had slept in it. The moment the elevator doors opened, her head snapped up. Her eyes met mine. I saw desperation, terror, and a raw, animalistic plea. Imani. She lunged forward, stumbling, and grabbed my arm before I could even step out of the elevator. She wasn't just crying, she was hyperventilating. Imani, thank God, we've been waiting. You have to help us, please, you have to help me. I just looked at her hand on the sleeve of my suit. I didn't move. I didn't speak. It's Maya, she sobbed, her nails digging into my arm. My baby, she's just like Leo. The doctors said. They said she's in heart failure. They said she needs the medicine. Your medicine. The Chimera V. They said you're the only one who can. Please, Imani, please, I'm begging you. She's my daughter. She's only 6. She's dying. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she dissolved into a full, body-racking wail. She was on her knees now in the hallway of my penthouse, clinging to my arm. The same sister who had hung up on me from Paris. The same sister who had told me I was ruining her wedding experience. My mother and father just stood there watching, their faces pale with fear and humiliation. This was their golden child, their perfect daughter on her knees begging the family failure. I slowly, deliberately detached Chloe's hand from my arm. She looked up at me, her face a mask of desperate, ugly tears. I looked past her. I looked at my mother who was avoiding my gaze. I looked at my father who was staring at the floor. I looked at Trevor who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. And then I looked back down at Chloe. My voice was calm. It was quiet. It was cold. I thought I didn't have a family. My mother Denise pushed past Chloe, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. The mask of the elegant socialite was gone. Her face was blotchy, her eyes wide with a terror I recognized. It was the same terror I had felt in the hospital hallway 7 years ago. Imani! She sobbed, taking a half step toward me, but stopping as if she knew she wasn't allowed to get any closer. Imani, please. We know. We know we were wrong. God, we were so wrong. Her voice was thick with tears. It was the first time in my entire life I had ever heard her admit to being wrong about anything. I was wrong, she choked out. I was horrible. But this is Maya. This is your niece. This is my grandbaby. Please, Imani, whatever we did, don't punish her. Don't let her die because of our mistakes. She was begging. My mother, who had told me my son's dying was an embarrassment, was now begging for her grandchild. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Chloe was just a heap on the floor muttering, "Please, Imani, please, please," over and over again. Then my father Marcus stepped forward. This was the man who had called my son a bad investment. The man who had looked down on me my entire life. The man who had always been in charge. He was not in charge now. He was visibly humbled. His shoulders were slumped. He couldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the expensive rug on my floor as he spoke. "Your mother is right," he said, his voice raspy. "We failed you. We failed Leo. There's no excuse for what we did." He finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "We will pay," he said, his voice gaining a fraction of its old confidence, as if money was the only language he knew how to speak. "Whatever it costs. Vireo Pharma. They told us they needed a patent from some company. We know it's you. We'll pay you for it. Name your price, Imani. Any price." He reached into his pocket. "Is it 90,000? Is that what this is? Here." He pulled out a checkbook. I'll write you a check for $1 million right now. 2 million. Just tell us the number. Tell us what it will take to make you sign the paper. We'll give you anything. Just name your price. He was trying to buy his way out. He was trying to turn this into a transaction just like he had 7 years ago. He thought he could write a check and make the problem disappear. He still didn't understand. I let his offer hang in the air. I let them sit in their desperation. Chloe a sobbing wreck on the floor. Denise a picture of broken, terrified motherhood. Marcus holding his checkbook like a white flag. They had offered me money. They who had denied me money when I had nothing. Now that I had everything, money was their only solution. I looked at my father's desperate, hopeful face, and I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was cold, sharp, and humorless. It echoed in the high-ceilinged room. They all flinched. Money, I said, my voice dripping with contempt. You're offering me money. I stepped out of the elevator, finally entering my apartment, and let the door slide shut behind me. You really, truly still don't get it, do you? You think this is about money? I let the word money hang in the air of my beautiful, expensive apartment. I looked at my father, his checkbook still in his hand, like a useless, insulting offering. I looked at my mother, her face blotchy with tears and desperate hope. And then I looked down at my sister Chloe, who was still kneeling on my floor, looking up at me as if I were her god. You think this is about money? I repeated, my voice soft but sharp enough to cut glass. You think you can write a check and fix this? You think you can buy my son's life 7 years too late? You think you can buy my forgiveness? I turned away from them and walked over to my floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. I could feel their desperate eyes on my back. I quit my job at Vireo Pharma 6 months ago, I said to the glass. The silence behind me was absolute. It was so total I could hear the faint sound of my mother's shaky intake of breath. What? Marcus finally stammered. What do you mean you quit? But the cure. The Chimera V. The doctors at UCLA said Vireo was the only one. Yes, I said, still not turning around. Vireo is the only one, and I did quit. I took my stock options, which were worth a considerable amount, and I left. I haven't been director of R&D for half a year. Chloe let out a strangled sound, a mix between a sob and a scream. No, but they have the medicine. They have to, Imani, you can't. You have to help us. You can call them. I finally turned around. I faced all 4 of them. The power dynamic which had defined my entire life had finally completely inverted. They were the ones who were desperate. They were the ones who were powerless. They were the ones begging. It doesn't matter if I call them, I said, my voice perfectly level. It doesn't matter that I worked there. It doesn't even matter that they have my research. I let the words hang in the air, watching the confusion build on their faces. They can't make the cure, I stated. What do you mean? Denise whispered. The doctor said. The doctor is right, they have the therapy. I explained as if I were talking to a group of slow, inattentive students. They have the genetic code. They have the cure. What they don't have is the key. They don't have the delivery mechanism. They have the bullet, but they don't have the gun. And after 7 years of trying, they have failed to build their own. I watched my father's face, the banker's mind desperately trying to process the information. The patent, he whispered, the realization dawning in his eyes. The shell company, Leogen Holdings. I smiled, a cold, thin smile. Yes, Dad, Leogen Holdings. My company, my patent. The one tiny, insignificant piece of the puzzle I kept for myself. The one piece your brilliant lawyers at Vireo missed when they were in such a hurry to buy my failed project for pennies on the dollar. I walked over and stood directly in front of them. For 7 years, Vireo Pharma has been trying to buy that patent. And for 7 years, I have refused to sell. So you see, Vireo can't make the cure. The doctors at UCLA can't get the cure. I looked down at Chloe, who was staring up at me in absolute primal terror. Maya's life isn't in their hands, I said. It's in mine. The revelation landed in the room with the force of a physical explosion. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Chloe's ragged, desperate gasps for air. My mother Denise looked as if I had struck her. Her hand went to her throat, her face pale with a dawning, sickening understanding. My father Marcus, the banker who lived by numbers and leverage, finally processed the new reality. His checkbook still clutched in his hand looked like a useless prop. He understood power, and he was staring at the person who held all of it. But Chloe? Chloe just shattered. "No," she whimpered. "No, you're lying. You're just saying that to hurt us. You're just like Dad said, you're being dramatic." "Am I?" I asked, my voice soft. "Go ahead. Call Vireo. Call Peterson. Ask him why his multi-billion-dollar project is stalled. Ask him about Leogen Holdings. Ask him why his entire R&D department can't solve a problem that I solved 8 years ago." The truth of my words hit her. This wasn't a lie. This wasn't drama. This was the cold, hard, transactional reality they had taught me to understand. "Imani, please." She scrambled forward, no longer the perfect, polished, golden child. She was just a terrified mother. She grabbed the hem of my suit jacket, her knuckles white. "Imani, I'm begging you. I'm on my knees. Please, don't do this. Don't let her die. My baby, please don't let Maya die." She collapsed at my feet, her hands grabbing my legs, her forehead pressed against my knees. She was clinging to me. The same sister who had hung up on me. The same sister who had danced at her late coma wedding while my son was in the ICU. She was now quite literally kneeling at my feet, begging for her own child's life. "I know I was wrong," she wailed, her voice muffled by my suit. "I know I was horrible, I was a monster, I know. But she's just a little girl. She didn't do anything. This is my fault, not hers. Punish me. Don't punish her. Please, Imani. I'll do anything. I'll give you anything. I'll give you all my money. I'll anything. Just please save my daughter." I looked down at the top of her head, at her messy, expensive hair. I felt nothing. No pity, no triumph. Just a cold, vast emptiness. Marcus and Denise stood frozen, two statues of parental horror, watching their perfect daughter reduced to this, watching the sister she had scorned hold her child's life in her hands. They finally understood what true power looked like. It wasn't their house in View Park. It wasn't their Escalade. It wasn't their social standing. It was this. It was holding the key. I didn't look at them. I looked at the man who had been silent this entire time. Her husband, Trevor. He was staring at his wife, who was sobbing and begging at my feet. And his expression, it wasn't sadness. It wasn't empathy. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. He was looking at his wife, the perfect, charming socialite he had married, and he was seeing for the very first time who she really was. Trevor stepped forward, his face pale, his voice tight with a confusion that was rapidly turning into anger. He grabbed Chloe's arm, yanking her roughly to her feet. The sudden movement was almost as shocking as her begging. "Chloe, get up," he commanded. "What is she talking about? What patent? What is going on?" Chloe stumbled, her face a mess of tears and mascara. She looked wildly between me and her husband. "Trevor, I don't... She's what?" Trevor snapped. "You told me your sister was a failed researcher. You told me she was a family outcast, that she was bitter and unstable. You told me you asked her for help with Maya and she refused. You said she wouldn't help because she hated you." He turned his furious gaze on me. "You've been lying. You've had the cure this whole time and you're just... what? Holding it for ransom." I crossed my arms. I didn't say a word. I just stared at my sister, watching her panic. This was her lie. Let her untangle it. "No," Chloe shrieked, grabbing Trevor's arm. "No, baby, it's not like that. She is hateful. She's always been jealous of me. She's just trying to make me look bad. She's trying to ruin us." I don't need to make you look bad, Chloe, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. You do an excellent job of that all by yourself. I looked at Trevor. His eyes were sharp, analytical. He was a man who, like my father, understood transactions. He was reevaluating his 7-year marriage in the span of 30 seconds. Is that what she told you? I asked him, my voice calm. That I'm just hateful. That I'm the bitter failed sister who's jealous of her perfect life. That's the gist of it, Trevor said grimly. I smiled, a small, cold smile. Well, she left out a few details. I nodded toward Chloe, who was now trembling. Go ahead, Chloe. Tell him. Tell him the whole story. Or I will. Chloe just sobbed, shaking her head, unable to speak. Fine, I said. Ask her about my son Leo. Ask her what happened 7 years ago when he was dying of this exact same disease. Ask her about the $90,000 I begged for and the $380,000 wedding she chose instead. Trevor's head snapped back to his wife. His grip on her arm tightened. What? What is she talking about? What wedding? She's twisting it, Chloe cried. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I said. I begged her. I begged them. I pointed to my parents who were frozen by the wall watching their perfect world implode. I begged all of them for $90,000 to save my son and they said no. They said he was a bad investment. And then not 2 weeks later, they wired $380,000 to Italy for her wedding deposit. Trevor let go of Chloe's arm as if he'd been burned. He looked at my parents. Is that true? He demanded. My father Marcus just stared at the floor. My mother Denise had her hand over her mouth. Oh my God, Trevor whispered. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to himself. He was seeing for the first time the family he had married into, the lies, the cruelty, the cold, hard rot under the polished, expensive surface. And he finally understood. Trevor stared at Chloe, his face a mask of pale confusion. What is she talking about? He demanded, his voice dangerously low. What 90,000? What 380,000? Answer me, Chloe. Chloe just shook her head, sobbing, unable to form words. She looked desperately at her parents. Daddy, help me. Tell him. My father Marcus looked at Trevor, attempting to regain his authority. Son, this is a private family matter, a simple misunderstanding from years ago. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. He told me no, she hung up on me, and you paid for a party. Trevor, please, Chloe finally wailed, grabbing her husband's arm. Don't listen to her. She's twisting it. She's always been jealous of me, of us. Is it true? Trevor asked, his voice flat. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his wife. The 90,000, is it true? Under the weight of his gaze and with her daughter's life on the line, the lies finally collapsed. Yes, she shrieked. Yes, it's true. But it wasn't my fault I was young. It was my wedding. What about the rest? Trevor pressed his voice like ice. The 380,000, it was our deposit for Lake Como, she cried, her defense crumbling into a full hysterical confession. Dad and Mom wanted to give us the best. We didn't know Leo was that sick. I thought she was just being dramatic. She's always dramatic, trying to ruin my moments. We paid for the wedding instead. We didn't think he would actually. She couldn't say the word. Trevor stared at her. The silence in my hallway was absolute, broken only by Chloe's ragged sobs. He looked at his wife, this perfect, beautiful woman he had built a life with, and I watched him see her, truly see her for the very first time. You, he whispered, his voice shaking with a horror that was deeper than anger. You let a child, your nephew, you let him almost die. You heard he was dying and you chose a party. No, Trevor, it wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, he roared, finally exploding. And you've been lying to me for 7 years, every time I asked why we never saw your sister. Every time you called her unstable or difficult. You told me she abandoned the family. You let me believe she was the monster. But it was you. It was all of you. He backed away from her, his face pale with disgust. He looked at me, then at my parents, as if seeing the rot in the foundation of the family he had married into. "Trevor, baby, please," Chloe begged, reaching for him. "It was for us. For our life. For our family." "Our family," he spat. "What kind of family does this? What kind of person are you?" He looked at Chloe, then at me, then back at his wife. I feel sick. Chloe's perfect marriage, the one purchased for $380,000, was imploding right on my doorstep. "This is all very fascinating," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through Chloe's wails. They all stopped and stared at me. "A real family drama," I continued. "But as you can see, I'm busy, and frankly, this is not my problem." I looked at my father, who was still holding his useless checkbook. "If you are serious about saving Maya's life, if you are serious about getting my patent, you can have your lawyer call my lawyer in the morning. We can discuss the terms of the transaction." "Imani, wait!" my mother cried out. I held up a hand. "I am not your daughter. I am a businesswoman. And you are standing in my hallway. Please be gone when I get back." I walked past them, stepped back into the elevator, and pressed the button for the lobby. I didn't look back. I just closed the door, shutting them all out, leaving them alone in the hallway with the ruins of their perfect lives. The next morning, the conference room at Ben Carter's law firm was silent and cold. It was the opposite of the emotional chaos from the night before. This was a place of business, of legal bindings and consequences. They were all there. My father Marcus and my mother Denise sat on one side of the massive, polished table. They looked gray and defeated. Chloe sat next to them, her face pale and swollen, her eyes vacant. She was a ghost of her former self. Her husband Trevor sat beside her but kept a noticeable cold distance. He was not there as her husband, he was there as a party to a transaction. On the other side of the table sat Ben, my lawyer, his face an unreadable professional mask. And next to him, sitting tall and proud, was my Aunt Janelle. I had called her an hour after my family left, and she had taken the first flight from her home in Oakland. She was here as my witness, my support, and my family. And then there was me. I sat at the head of the table. I was no longer Dr. Jackson, the employee. I was Imani Jackson, the founder of Leogen Holdings, the owner of the asset. Ben cleared his throat and slid a single piece of paper to the center of the table. "Thank you all for coming. Let's be clear about what this is. This is not a family counseling session. This is a legal negotiation. My client, Dr. Jackson, holds the exclusive licensing rights to the HVV9 delivery mechanism, which, as you know, is the only viable method to administer the Chimera V gene therapy. Without her license, there is no cure." My father Marcus leaned forward, his banker instincts kicking in, grasping for control. "All right, let's not waste time. We understand. What is the price?" "We are prepared to discuss a significant seven-figure sum for the license. Just tell us the number, Imani." I let the word price hang in the air. I looked at each of them. At my father, who still believed money could solve any problem. At my mother, who was staring at her hands. At Chloe, who was staring at nothing at all. Finally, I spoke. My voice was calm, and it echoed slightly in the quiet, expensive room. "You want me to save Maya, and I will." A small, choked sound came from my mother. Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes suddenly filled with a desperate, wild hope. "I will not let a 6-year-old child die," I continued. "I will not become you." I saw my mother flinch as if I had slapped her. "But," I said, leaning forward, "you need to understand. Just as my lawyer said, this is not a family meeting. This is not a reconciliation. This is a transaction. You are here to purchase a license for a life-saving medical technology." Marcus nodded, relieved. "Exactly. A transaction. So the price. Your number." "My number," I said, "is not money." The confusion returned to their faces. What do you mean?" Denise whispered. "I mean, I said that you don't have enough money to pay me for what you did. You couldn't print enough money to make me forgive you. You can't buy my absolution. So no, the license for my patent will be granted to Virio Pharma for $1. Trevor, the first to understand, just stared at me. $1, then, what's the catch? Oh, there's a catch, I said. The price isn't money, the price is justice. The price is truth. The price is accountability. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the end of the room. I picked up a black marker. I don't want your money. I want you to pay. I have 3 conditions. You will meet every single one of them without negotiation. You will sign legally binding documents agreeing to all 3. Today. Right now. If you hesitate, if you argue, if you refuse even one, I will walk out of this room. The deal will be off. Vireo will get nothing. And Maya, well, that will be your choice, not mine. I looked at them. They were trapped. Are we clear? My father Marcus, the man who had controlled my entire life, just nodded, his face ashen. Yes, we're clear. Good, I said, uncapping the marker. Then let's begin. I turned from the whiteboard and walked back to the head of the table. I looked directly at my parents, Marcus and Denise. Condition 1, I said, my voice cutting through the silent, terrified room. This is for you two. I looked at my father. 7 years ago, I came to you begging for $90,000. You told me it was a bad investment. Today, you're going to make that investment. I slid a single blank bank check across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of my father. Then I slid a heavy, expensive-looking pen next to it. You will write a check, I continued, for the original $90,000 plus 7 years of compound interest. My lawyer has already done the math for you. The total is $155,842. Denise. My mother made a small, strangled sound. Marcus stared at the blank check as if it were a snake. That check, I went on, will be made payable to the Boston Pediatric Heart Foundation, the very organization that funded the wing my son recovered in. My father picked up the pen, his hand visibly shaking. He was a banker. He understood this. He was about to write the check. And one more thing, I said, stopping his hand. In the memo line. I leaned forward, my voice dropping so they had to strain to hear me. In the memo line, you will write the following words, exactly as I say them. I watched his eyes. You will write reimbursement for refusal of medical care for Leo Jackson 2018. The pen dropped from my father's hand. It clattered loudly on the mahogany table. What? He whispered. You heard me. This is... My mother Denise finally spoke, her voice a reedy, panicked whisper. You can't ask that. Imani, that's... Humiliating, I offered. Yes, that's the point. It's the price. My father's face, which had been pale and ashen, was now turning a deep, blotchy red. The humiliation was more than he could bear. This is outrageous, he finally roared, slamming his fist on the table. This is blackmail. It's a private family matter. You can't force me to write that. It's an admission. It's slander. Ben. My lawyer spoke for the first time, his voice silky smooth. Actually, Marcus, it's only slander if it's not true. And seeing as we have multiple witnesses in this room who just heard you confess to that exact fact, I'd call it an accurate description of a debt being paid. My father looked around, trapped. Chloe was sobbing into her hands. Trevor was staring at him with cold contempt. Aunt Janelle just watched him, her expression like granite. You are trying to destroy me, my father yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. My reputation, my name. You destroyed your name, I said, my voice perfectly calm. You destroyed it when you chose a party over your grandson. I am just here to collect the receipt. I looked at my watch, a very nice watch that I had bought myself. You have 10 minutes, I said. 10 minutes to decide if your reputation is worth more than Maya's life. The clock is ticking. The silence in the conference room was absolute. My father Marcus stared at the pen as if it were a weapon pointed at him. I could see the internal war on his face, his pride versus his fear, his reputation versus his granddaughter's life. He looked at my mother Denise, but she was useless, just staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. He looked at Chloe, who was just whispering, "Daddy, please just do it, just sign it." He knew he was beaten. Slowly, his hand shaking with a visible tremor, picked up the pen. He uncapped it. He pulled the checkbook closer. He started to write. His hand was so unsteady that the elegant script he was known for was reduced to a jagged, angry scrawl. I watched him write the name Boston Pediatric Heart Foundation. I watched him write the numbers 155-84200. And then I watched him move to the memo line. He paused. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. He looked at me one last time, his eyes full of pure, unadulterated hatred. I just stared back, my expression blank, giving him nothing. He bent over the check and wrote, "Reimbursement for refusal of medical care. Leo Jackson, 2018. He tore the check from the book with a violent rip and slid it across the table. I didn't pick it up immediately. I let it sit there for a moment, a small white rectangle that represented his complete and total surrender. Ben, my lawyer, finally reached over, picked it up, and reviewed it. He nodded at me. "Good," I said, my voice clinical. "Condition 1 is met." I then turned my full, undivided attention to my sister. Chloe flinched as if I had physically moved toward her. She looked small and broken, her expensive clothes looking rumpled and out of place. "You," I said. "Your turn." "Me," she whispered. I don't have... What? "Let's talk about your wedding," I said. "The one in Lake Como. The one my mother posted was family is everything. The one you were at while my son was in the ICU. Do you remember the number, Chloe? Or has all the champagne made you forget?" "Imani, please," she sobbed. $380,000. I said, my voice ringing out in the quiet room. "That was the deposit. The deposit my parents paid because you deserved the best. That's what your perfect wedding cost. A wedding that, by my calculation, happened just 3 weeks after you hung up on me while I was begging for my son's life." "What? What do you want?" she stammered. "I want what's fair," I said. "You will liquidate $380,000 of your assets. You will sell the house. You will sell the car Trevor bought you. You will sell your Hermes bags, your diamond jewelry, anything it takes. And you will transfer that exact amount, $380,000, into a trust fund in Leo's name. It's the price for your party, Chloe. He deserves to be compensated for the risk you took with his life." She looked at me in pure horror. "What? No, I can't. The house. That's Trevor's money. Our assets are shared. Trevor, tell her you can't let her do this." She turned to her husband, her face crumpled in a desperate appeal. "Trevor, baby, please don't let her. It's our home." Trevor, who had been silent just watching this all unfold, slowly uncrossed his arms. He looked at his wife. His face was cold. "No, Chloe," he said, his voice quiet but cutting through her sobs. "It's our money, and I agree to her condition." He looked at me. "Sell the house." Chloe's head snapped toward her husband, her face a mask of utter disbelief. "Trevor, no. No, you don't mean that. Not our home." "It's just a house, Chloe," Trevor said, his voice completely dead, his eyes never leaving mine. "Apparently, we have debts to pay." The finality of his words, the complete and total abandonment, was the final blow. Chloe made a sound, a low, animalistic wail of pure despair. She didn't just faint. She collapsed. Her body went completely limp, and she slid from her chair onto the expensive carpet of the conference room, a heap of designer clothing and broken promises. My mother, Denise, screamed, "Chloe! Oh my God, she fainted! Marcus, do something!" My father started to rise from his chair, but I held up my hand. "Stop!" I commanded. He froze. "She's fine," I said, looking down at my sister's crumpled form. "She's just overwhelmed." Ben, perhaps you could have your assistant get her a glass of water. Ben nodded to someone outside the room. I did not move. I let them all stare at her for a moment. At the golden child, the victor, the one who had everything now lying on the floor in a puddle of her own ruined life. As I was saying, I continued as if nothing had happened, as if my sister wasn't unconscious at my feet. That was condition 2. I turned back to the whiteboard. And now for the final condition, condition 3. My parents stared at me, their faces ashen. There's more, Denise whispered, her voice trembling. Oh yes, I said. This is the most important one. The first 2. That was just the payment for entry. That was the collateral. This is the price for my silence. I turned to face them fully. For 7 years you have been living a lie. You didn't just forget me, you erased me. You erased my son. You posted your perfect family photos. You wrote your captions. Family is everything. The whole family together. You told your friends, your community, your entire world that your family was perfect and complete. You made us ghosts. Denise was sobbing. We were trying to move on. You were building a narrative, I corrected. A narrative that required my son and me to be invisible. Now you're going to fix it. You are going to acknowledge him. You are going to acknowledge what you did. What do you want, Imani? My father asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. A public apology. A social media post. I almost laughed. You still think this is about your image, don't you? You think this is about what other people think? No, I don't care about your friends. I don't care about your country club. I leaned on the table, my voice dropping to a low, intense whisper that filled the room. You are going to sit here. You are not going to move. And you are going to listen. My son Leo is going to come into this room. And you, I pointed to my father. And you, I pointed to my mother. And you, I pointed to Chloe, who was just beginning to stir, are going to look my 14-year-old son in the eye. And you are going to tell him one by one why you let him almost die 7 years ago. The horror on their faces was palpable. This was worse than the money. This was worse than the public humiliation. No, my mother whispered. Imani, you can't. He's just a child. He was a child when he was in that ICU bed. I roared, my voice finally breaking its cold calm. He was a child when you went to Lake Como. He was a child when you hung up on me. He has lived his whole life knowing what you did. Now he deserves to see the faces of the people who did it. He deserves to hear you say it. I looked at my Aunt Janelle, who was watching with tears in her own eyes. She just nodded once. This is the price, I said. This is the only price that matters. You will confess to him. I straightened up. I looked at Ben. He knew his cue. He's waiting, I said. Ben stood, walked to the adjoining door in the conference room, and slowly, deliberately turned the handle. The adjoining door opened, with a soft click. The sound was louder than a gunshot in the dead silent room. My mother Denise made a sound like a small wounded animal. My father Marcus looked like he was going to be physically ill. Chloe, who Ben's assistant had helped back into her chair, was just staring at the door, her face a mask of absolute terror. And then my son walked in. This was not the 7-year-old child they had refused to save. This was not the small, pale boy sleeping in an ICU bed. This was Leo, 14 years old. He was tall, standing just over 6 feet, with the lean, strong shoulders of a high school track star. He was healthy. He was intelligent. And as he walked into that room, he moved with a quiet, unnerving confidence that he had inherited directly from me. He was not a victim. He was a witness. He didn't look at his grandparents. He didn't look at his aunt. He walked calmly to my side, standing just behind my shoulder. He looked at no one but me. I reached up and put my hand on his arm. Then I turned my gaze back to my family. Speak, I commanded. No one moved. They were frozen. Dad, I said, my voice sharp. You first. Look at him. Look at your grandson, the bad investment. Tell him why you wouldn't help." My father's face contorted. He looked at Ben, the lawyer, as if for help. Ben just stared back, his face blank. He looked at his wife, Denise. She was weeping into a silk handkerchief. "Marcus," I said. "Now." Slowly, painfully, my father lifted his head. He looked at Leo. He saw his grandson, tall and healthy, staring back at him with cold, knowing eyes. I, my father stammered. "Leo, I, we, I thought it was a risk." He finally managed to say, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The money. I thought it was a bad investment. I, I chose the money. I chose my retirement. I'm sorry." Leo just watched him. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He just watched. "Mom," I said, turning to Denise. "Your turn." "Oh, Imani, please don't," she sobbed. "He's just a boy." "He was just a boy 7 years ago," I shot back. "Look at him. Tell him." She looked at Leo, her face crumbling. I was embarrassed," she cried. "The GoFundMe, what people would think. The wedding, Chloe's wedding. It was so important. I chose the wedding. I chose what people would think. I let you. I let you go." Finally, I turned my gaze to my sister. Chloe was trembling so violently, the chair was rattling against the floor. "Chloe," I said, "look at him." "I can't," she whispered. "Look at him," I commanded. She slowly, agonizingly lifted her head. Her swollen, red-rimmed eyes met Leo's cold, steady gaze. "Tell him," I said. I was in Paris," she whispered, the confession tearing out of her. "I was at my dress fitting. You called, and he was in the ICU, and I... She started to sob, a horrible gulping sound. "I told you that you were negative. I told you that you were ruining my day. I hung up. I hung up the phone. I hung up on him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The room was filled with the sound of their confessions, their shame, their guilt. It was all out, raw and bleeding on the conference room table. After a long moment, the sobbing subsided. There was nothing left to say. Everyone, my parents, Trevor, Aunt Janelle, my lawyer, everyone looked at Leo. They were all waiting for a reaction, waiting for the boy to cry, to yell, to say, "I hate you," to say, "It's okay, I forgive you." They were waiting for an emotional release. They were waiting for him to make them feel better. Leo did none of those things. He just stood there, tall and straight, his expression as cold and unreadable as my own. He looked at his grandfather, the man who had called him a bad investment. He looked at his grandmother, the woman who had chosen her image over his life. He looked at his aunt, the woman who had hung up on him while he was dying. He held their gaze for a long, heavy, silent moment. Then he gave a single sharp, solemn nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't understanding. It was an acknowledgement. A judgment. It was finished. Ben, my lawyer, cleared his throat, the small sound breaking the heavy, suffocating silence. He moved with crisp, efficient motions. He walked over to my father Marcus and picked up the check for $155,000. He reviewed it, checked the memo line, and nodded. He then moved to Chloe and Trevor, collecting the legally binding agreement for the sale of their home and the transfer of the $380,000. He placed the documents in a neat pile in front of me. I picked up my father's check. I stared at his jagged, angry signature. I looked at the memo line. Reimbursement for refusal of medical care. It was real. I had the receipt for my son's life. I looked at the agreement. Chloe had signed her signature, just a wet, illegible scrawl. "The conditions have been met," I said, my voice echoing in the room. I slid the papers back to Ben. I pulled out my phone. I sent a single text message to Peterson, the CEO of Vireo Pharma. The Leo Gen patent is now available for licensing. Have your legal team contact Mr. Ben Carter immediately. I put the phone down on the table. It's done, I told them. Ben will finalize the agreement with Vireo today. The license will be granted. Maya will get the treatment. My mother Denise, who had been sitting frozen staring at her hands, let out a sound, a long, shuddering wail of pure, unadulterated relief. The terror that had been holding her captive for days finally broke. "Oh, God!" she cried, her voice cracking. "Oh, God, Imani, thank you! Thank you!" She stood up, her legs unsteady. She took a step toward me, her hands outstretched, her face a mess of tears and relief. "Imani," she whispered. "Thank you, baby. I knew you wouldn't let her die. I knew you were still in there. My daughter." I didn't move. I just watched her, my face as cold and hard as stone. She seemed to take my silence as an opening. She took another step, her voice dropping into a desperate, pleading, familiar tone, the one she used when she wanted to smooth things over, to put the ugliness back in the box. "Imani," she said, trying to smile through her tears. We can fix this. Now we can. The truth, it's all out. We made terrible mistakes. We know that now. We see that. But we're still family. We can start over. We can be a family again. Can't we? Please, Imani, can we just be a family?" She was begging for reconciliation. She was begging for forgiveness. She thought that because I had shown mercy, I would also offer amnesia. She thought this transaction, this forced confession, had somehow reset the last 30 years. I looked at her, at this woman, who was my mother. This woman who had chosen her image, her house, her country club, her party over my son. Then I turned my head. I looked at Leo. He was standing tall beside me, his gaze fixed on her. He had not cried. He had not yelled. He had simply watched his young old eyes, missing nothing. He had seen them for exactly who they were. He was my son. He was my future. He was my family. I looked back at my mother's desperate, hopeful, tear-streaked face, and I shook my head once. "No," I said. "You don't get a family. You just completed a transaction. You paid your bill. You paid for a service. The service of saving Maya's life." I stood up, and Leo stood with me. "The transaction is complete." "No." The word was quiet, but it had the finality of a slamming vault door. My mother Denise froze, her hands still outstretched. The desperate, hopeful smile on her face dissolved. What do you mean, no?" she stammered. "Imani, I'm your mother." "You are my mother," I agreed, my voice flat. "And he is my father. And she is my sister. And that is a biological fact. But a family—" I let out a short, cold laugh. "No. A family doesn't do what you did. A family doesn't choose a party over a child's life. A family doesn't let one of its own nearly die and then lie about it for 7 years." I looked at each of them one by one. "You aren't a family," I said, my voice like ice. "You are a group of individuals bound by a shared name and a mutual interest in preserving your own image. And today, that image was threatened. So you did what you always do. You paid to make the problem go away." I walked over to Ben, took the check from my father and the signed trust agreement from Chloe. I held them up. "This," I said, tapping the check, "is not an apology. This is a fine. This," I tapped the trust agreement, "is not remorse. This is restitution. You don't get a family back. You just completed a transaction. You paid your bill. You paid for the service of saving Maya's life." I put the papers neatly into my briefcase and snapped it shut. "The transaction is complete. My company will license the patent. Your granddaughter will live." I walked to the conference room door and pulled it open, holding it wide. The bright light from the hallway streamed in, illuminating their pale, shocked faces. "We're done here," I said. "Please leave." For a moment, no one moved. They were paralyzed. This was not how it was supposed to go. In their world, the confession, the tears, the money, it was supposed to lead to forgiveness, to a reset. "Imani, please." My father Marcus said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He looked like a broken man. "Don't do this. Not like this." "Get out," I said again, my voice louder now, harder. "This is my lawyer's office. Your business here is finished." Aunt Janelle, who had been silent this whole time, stood up. She walked over to my mother, who was still frozen. "Come on, Denise," she said, her voice not unkind, but firm. "You heard her. It's time to go." She gently guided my mother, who was moving like a sleepwalker, toward the door. My father stood slowly, his legs unsteady. He looked at me one last time, his eyes empty. Chloe was still in her chair, being half-supported, half-dragged by Trevor. Her face was blank, her eyes vacant with shock. She had lost everything in the span of an hour. Her husband, her home, and now any hope of reconciliation with me. They filed out one by one, a silent, defeated procession. My father, my mother, my sister, her husband. They didn't look back. I waited until Trevor, the last one, had cleared the doorway. Then I slammed the heavy wooden door shut. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of 7 years of pain ending. It was the sound of a final, irrevocable break. It was the sound of freedom. The conference room was suddenly blissfully silent. Aunt Janelle and Ben were watching me, their expressions soft. I turned. Leo was still standing right where he had been, tall and strong, his gaze steady. He hadn't moved. He had watched the entire execution without a word. He looked at me, his 14-year-old eyes full of an adult's understanding. I looked back at my son, the one I had sacrificed everything for, the one who was my true north. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. We just looked at each other, and in the silence we understood. It was over. Ben and Aunt Janelle were watching me, their expressions a mixture of awe and concern. Leo simply stood by my side, a silent, solid presence. I took one deep breath, letting the finality of the moment settle in. The door was closed. That chapter was over. Now the next one began. I picked up my smartphone from the table. My hand was perfectly steady. I scrolled through my contacts to Peterson, CEO Vireo, and pressed the call button. I did not put it on speaker. This call was for me. He answered on the first ring. "Jackson, I was hoping to hear from you." I could hear the tension in his voice, the anticipation of a CEO about to land a multi-billion-dollar product. "Peterson," I said, my voice cold, professional, and completely in control. "It's Dr. Jackson. We have a deal." I could hear his sharp intake of breath. "The Leogen patent, you're licensing it." "Yes," I said. "My lawyer Ben Carter will be in touch with your legal team within the hour to finalize the terms. The fee will be $1. There was a stunned silence. $1. Peterson stammered, his capitalist brain unable to process a number that wasn't in the millions. $1, I confirmed, with several non-negotiable conditions regarding manufacturing oversight and compassionate use access, which Mr. Carter will explain. But the license is yours. I don't know what to say, Doctor. This is... Get your team ready, I interrupted. I wasn't interested in his gratitude. And prepare your public relations department. I want a joint press conference by the end of the week. Vireo Pharma and Leogen Holdings. Leogen, he asked, confused. My company, I said. The one you've been negotiating with. I'm the owner. We will be announcing this as a partnership. Is that clear? Yes? He said, his voice instantly respectful. Yes, Dr. Jackson. Absolutely. Good, I said. Get your team ready. The Chimera V technology is about to hit the market. I hung up the phone. I looked at Leo and then at Aunt Janelle. My family thought this was about them. They thought this was about revenge. They were wrong. This was never just about saving Maya. It was about saving all the other Mayas, all the other Leos. It was about the thousands of other children on waiting lists, the thousands of other families praying for a miracle. My technology, my cure was finally going to save them all. The first domino to fall was Maya. The transaction, as I had called it, was successful. With the license for the Leogen patent in hand, Vireo Pharma mobilized. Their labs worked around the clock. Within a week, the first dose of the Chimera V therapy was synthesized. Maya, my niece, the 6-year-old girl I had never met, received the treatment. I heard from Aunt Janelle that the results were almost immediate. The arrhythmia stabilized. Her heart function began to improve. Within a month, she was in remission. I had saved her. But that was where my involvement ended. I had held up my end of the bargain. The consequences were now theirs to manage. For Chloe, the fallout was swift and brutal. Her husband Trevor had been silent during that meeting, his face a mask of cold fury. He had driven her home, and as I later learned from Aunt Janelle, he had begun packing a bag the moment they walked through the door of their perfect, expensive house. He had seen the truth. He had seen the woman he married, the golden child, confess that she had valued a wedding dress and a party over the life of a dying child. He had learned that the foundation of their entire 7-year marriage was a lie built on the suffering of her own family. 2 weeks later, Chloe was served with divorce papers. Trevor didn't just file. He filed for total war. He cited irreconcilable differences and moral instability. He wasn't just aiming for the house, he was aiming for the children. In the custody battle, he used her own confession against her. He painted a precise, damning picture of a woman so morally bankrupt, so pathologically obsessed with image and status, that she had knowingly lied to him for their entire relationship, covered up her family's cruelty, and actively participated in the neglect of her dying nephew. The judge, as it turned in, agreed. Chloe, the perfect mother from Instagram, lost primary custody of both Maya and Jackson. She was granted supervised visitation, deemed an untrustworthy influence by the court. She lost her husband. She lost her children. She was forced to sell the house to pay the $380,000 trust fund for Leo. Her perfect life, purchased with the currency of cruelty, was now officially and publicly bankrupt. My parents, Marcus and Denise, faced a different kind of execution. A social one. They kept their house at first. They had the $90,000 after all. But the check I had forced my father to write was a ticking time bomb. That memo line, reimbursement for refusal of medical care for Leo Jackson 2018, was the price of their reputation. My Aunt Janelle, a woman who believed justice was more important than appearances, was not quiet. She didn't leak it to the press. She did something far more effective. She mentioned it in confidence to her pastor. She showed the photocopied check to the deacon board of her church, the same church my parents had once attended before they moved to their exclusive country club. The news spread through the wealthy, tight-knit Black community of Los Angeles like a disease. It wasn't just gossip, it was a scandal. Marcus and Denise Jackson, the pillars of philanthropy, the chairs of the charity galas, had been exposed. They had refused to save their own grandson. They had chosen a party in Italy instead. And worse, their outcast daughter had forced them to pay reimbursement for it. The shunning was immediate. They were quietly uninvited from the museum board. Their invitations to the annual charity balls got lost in the mail. Friends of 30 years suddenly stopped returning their calls. At the country club, tables would go silent when they walked by. They were pariahs. They had built their entire lives on their image, their reputation, their status. And with one check, I had destroyed it all. They couldn't bear the shame. They couldn't live in a community that now knew the truth of what they were. Within 6 months, they put the View Park house, their fortress of reputation, up for sale. They had kept their house, but they had lost their home. I didn't go back to Vireo Pharma. The day after the meeting, I submitted my resignation, effective immediately. My contract, the one that had tied me to them as part of the acquisition, was nullified by their own attempts to negotiate with my private company, Leogen Holdings. They had breached the terms, and I was free. Peterson, the CEO, tried to counter. He offered me a new title, a staggering salary, a position on the board of directors. He didn't understand. It was never about the job. It was about the control. I had been their prisoner for 7 years, and I was finally walking out of my own cell. My new life began. The licensing agreement for the Leogen patent was finalized. The royalties from every single dose of Chimera V, the miracle cure the world was now clamoring for, flowed directly to me. My patent, the key they had overlooked, turned out to be the most valuable part of the entire technology. The $500,000 I had sold my company for was a joke. The royalties from my first quarter of licensing were projected to be over $50 million. Within a year, my net worth would be in the billions. I had become almost overnight one of the wealthiest self-made women in the country, all from the one thing I had been smart enough to hide. The money from my family also arrived. My father's check for $155,000 cleared. I immediately wired it to the Boston Pediatric Heart Foundation, just as I said I would. A week later, the wire transfer from Chloe came. $380,000. The full price of her Lake Como wedding. The price of her perfect life, which was now in ruins. The money sat in my account. I looked at the number. It was blood money. It was the price of my son's suffering. I didn't keep it for Leo. Leo didn't need it. He had me. I transferred the entire $380,000 to the Boston Foundation as well. I attached it to my father's reimbursement check. It was an anonymous donation, but I knew. It was justice. It was accountability. I was now 38 years old. I was a billionaire. I was free. I had a healthy, thriving son, and I had no family to speak of. I had my health, my son, and unlimited resources. The question that echoed in the silence of my penthouse was no longer, how will I survive? It was, what do I do now? I had the power to do anything. I could have retired. I could have bought a private island and disappeared. I could have spent the rest of my life enjoying the wealth my family's cruelty had inadvertently helped me secure. But that wasn't who I was. I had my genius back. I had my freedom. And I had a fire inside me that had been burning for 7 long years. Vireo Pharma had my old research, but they didn't have me. They didn't have my mind. They didn't have my next idea. I picked up the phone. I didn't call a realtor. I didn't call a travel agent. I called my lawyer. Ben, I said, I need you to file the incorporation papers for a new company. I didn't go back to Vireo. I didn't need to. I didn't need their title, their office, or their validation. I had my freedom. I had my son, and I had the multi-billion-dollar royalties from the patent that was now saving lives around the world. 2 weeks after the meeting in Ben's office, I filed the incorporation papers. It wasn't Chimera Therapeutics. That company was born of research and sacrifice. This new company, this was born of justice. I named it Leogen Therapeutics, named for my son Leo. Not just as a tribute, but as a constant reminder of why I was doing this. My life's work wasn't just about the science. It was about the life it had saved. My first act as founder and CEO was not to lease a fancy office or to hire a PR team. It was to get on a plane. I flew back to Los Angeles and walked into the pediatric cardiology clinic at UCLA, the same one where my world had fallen apart 7 years ago. Dr. Evans was still there, his hair grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his gaze just as kind. He looked up from his desk, surprised to see me. Imani, or should I say Dr. Jackson the billionaire. He smiled, though his eyes were tired. Just Imani is fine, doctor, I said. I'm here with a proposition. How would you like to stop fighting with insurance companies? He raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. I'm starting a new company, Leogen. Our mission won't be just to discover cures, it will be to deliver them. I'm building a hybrid company, a for-profit research arm funded by my royalties that will continue to innovate, and a nonprofit foundation that will be its soul. I slid a folder across his desk. I'm offering you the position of Chief Medical Officer of the entire organization, and I'm also offering you the chair of the Leogen Foundation. He opened the folder, his eyes scanning the mission statement. The Leogen Foundation, I explained, will have a single mandate to provide our life-saving gene therapies, including Chimera V, completely free of charge to any family that cannot afford it. No GoFundMes, no begging, no parents having to choose between their retirement and their child. Dr. Evans looked up, his eyes shining. Imani, this is revolutionary. It's just, I said, what should have been done all along. I pulled out 2 checks from my briefcase. The first one was for $155,842. The second was for $380,000. This is the seed money for the foundation, I said, placing them on his desk. The first check is from my father as reimbursement for refusing to save my son. The second is from my sister, the full price of her Lake Como wedding. This foundation won't just be built on hope. It will be built on the price of my family's cruelty. It's accountability turned into fuel to make sure no other family ever has to go through what I did. Dr. Evans looked at the checks, then back at me. He didn't speak for a long moment. He just stood up, walked around his desk, and pulled me into a hug. It would be the honor of my life, Dr. Jackson, he said. 1 year later, I was not on the cover of Forbes. I was on a stage at the American Pediatric Heart Foundation's annual conference. I was 39 years old, and I was not the director of R&D at a company that wasn't mine. I was the founder and CEO of Leogen Therapeutics. The ballroom was filled with the world's top pediatric cardiologists, researchers, and patient families. The applause was deafening. I had just finished my keynote address, not about profit margins, but about our mission. 8 years ago, I had said, my voice echoing, "My son was one of your patients. He was a statistic, a name on a waiting list for a cure that didn't exist." I paused, looking out at the crowd. Today that cure exists. But that is not enough. A cure that is locked behind a $90,000 price tag, a cure that is inaccessible to the families who need it most, is not a cure. It is a privilege. That is why, I concluded, the Leogen Foundation, funded by the profits of our research, is today committing $50 million to this organization to create a fund that will ensure no child is ever turned away from life-saving gene therapy for lack of funds. The audience was on its feet. The applause washed over me, but it wasn't the validation I was looking for. I looked to the side of the stage, into the wings. Leo was standing there. He was 15 now, tall and strong, his high school's track jacket draped over his shoulders. He was watching me not with awe, but with a quiet, knowing pride. He wasn't just my son. He was my purpose. He was the reason I had done it all. He smiled and gave me a small nod. I smiled back, my heart full in a way my bank account could never make me feel. As I walked off the stage, the applause still thundering, Dr. Evans, now my chief medical officer, pulled me into a hug. "You did it, Imani. You really did it." My Aunt Janelle, who now served as the full-time director of the Leogen Foundation, was waiting for me. She had a bottle of water in one hand and my buzzing phone in the other. She looked happier and more vibrant than I had ever seen her. "They're going to have to rebuild the entire fundraising wing after that speech," she laughed, handing me the water. "You just made their entire decade." "We did," I corrected her, taking a sip. "Well, don't get too comfortable," she said, her smile turning mischievous. She held out my phone. The screen was lit up with an incoming call. The name displayed was Denise. Aunt Janelle's eyes twinkled. She's calling again. That's the third time this week. I looked at the phone screen at the name Denise flashing insistently. My mother. 7 years of silence and now 3 calls in 1 week. They were desperate. They wanted something, forgiveness, absolution, a way back in. They wanted me, the daughter they had erased, to fix the mess they had made of their lives. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel anything at all. I just smiled. A small, private, knowing smile. With a simple tap of my thumb, I silenced the call. The ringing stopped. I handed the phone back to my Aunt Janelle. She looked at the screen, saw the missed call, and just winked, sliding the phone into her pocket. She understood. The applause from the ballroom was starting to die down. Leo walked over to me holding a bottle of water. He was 15 now, tall and strong, his eyes clear and intelligent. He had watched the entire speech from the wings. He handed me the water. "Mom," he said, his voice calm. "Grandma was calling again." I took the bottle, my hand steady. I unscrewed the cap and took a long drink. The water was cool. I looked at my son, my healthy, brilliant son. "They'll always be calling Leo," I said, my voice just as calm as his. I shrugged, a simple final dismissal of a life I no longer lived. "It doesn't matter. We have work to do." I put my arm around his shoulders. He was so tall now that he put his arm around me and we stood there for a moment side by side. A complete unit. A real family. "You were great, Mom," he said quietly. "We were great," I corrected. Together we turned away from the stage, away from the applause, away from the ghosts of the past. We walked through the exit into the bright hallway, moving forward side by side, toward the future we had built together. The future that was just beginning. This story teaches us that true worth is never defined by toxic family approval. Imani was called a failure, but she quietly invested in her own genius. When the family who rejected her needed her most, her hidden success became her ultimate power. Real security doesn't come from begging those who undervalue you, it comes from building your own independence. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't just having the wealth, it was having the strength to set the terms for justice and build a new legacy based on true compassion, not just a perfect image. Have you ever had to build your own success in silence while being underestimated by those closest to you? Share your story in the comments below.